All righty. Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. For the Select Committee on School Facilities, August 24th, 2026, Senator Dockstader. Here. Senator Love. Here. Senator McEwen.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Representative Bratton.
Here.
Representative Geringer.
Here.
Representative Heft.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Vice Chair Angelos.
Here.
Chairman Landon.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome everybody. It's good to see everyone. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the May meeting, if so inclined, moved by Representative Geringer and Senator Taft seconded it, along with Representative Bratton. Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? Okay, those minutes have been approved. We'll move right on. If there's any preceding announcements to the agenda, you're welcome to raise a hand. I would just say this, what a beautiful day to drive down. It was absolutely one of those days. And it was dead still out until I got to Wheatland. So that's when the little breeze comes up and the air comes at you in a hurry. So let's jump in. We're going to start this morning committee with major maintenance. You can tell that we've got a pretty packed agenda with a lot of things to consider today. I've always said this is one of the most well-vetted products that goes to the legislature every year. Our statutory requirement is that we present a budget yearly, not biennially. So that's our duty today, is to begin to get an idea of what we want to forward. So let's do major maintenance. Director, come on up. Let's get started. I see some commissioners here today, Director, and I would love to give you and the chairman an opportunity to introduce our commissioners. They do a lot of great work. Sometimes we just take what they give us and move on without tipping our Stetsons. So can you do that for us this morning?
Mr. Chairman, I sure can. Del McComey, I'm the director for the State Construction Department. And Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, we've got a lot of our commissioners here. So we have 7 commissioners, and 5 of them are here in the audience today and one's online. So as I introduce them, so they'll stand up and so you kind of get a face here, or at least raise their hand. We have Chairman Tarter. And we have Vice Chair Thorne. Commissioner Thayer. Commissioner Kasselhoff. And Commissioner Coughlin. And then online, we have Commissioner Van Mark, so out of the Torrington area. So again, great to have them here in the room. And I think it indicates the support that they give us throughout the year. You know, we meet with them probably 8 or 9 times. And actually with all the Mercer studies, we've had a number of kind of informal meetings or shorter meetings just to go over Mercer studies to keep the things kind of flowing. So they've had an awful lot of work and like you, Mr. Chairman, you know, they get paid big bucks for the job. So I just want to thank them for all their hard work. So
Chairman Tarter, great to see you. And commissioners, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here during the break and otherwise. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you've got something, Chairman, please don't hesitate and we'll break the conversation and come up to the microphone at any time. So we appreciate all the work that our commission does. Director, keep going.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, you know, we tag team this work. So we've got Mr. Rexis and Administrator Carlson here at the table with us, and that'll kind of be how the day goes. Each of them certainly work hard in their expertise, and I'm kind of just at the 50,000 foot level. So I'm going to turn this over at most parts today for them to do all the heavy lift. But again, I think you're kind of used to that. So the first item up, Mr. Chairman, is the major maintenance and the impact on virtual enrollment. And so the introduction to that, you know, at your May meeting, we were asked to evaluate how the virtual enrollment affects the allowable square footage calculations for major maintenance payments. And It's pretty interesting going through that study ourselves and looking at that. And if you look at between 2023 and 2026, there was a number of school districts that were operating with the virtual, and it increased from 14 to 24 school districts. Despite the broader local fluctuations in the virtual program, statewide, it's highly concentrated in just 4 districts, and those are Weston 7, Niobrara 1, Bighorn 1, and Sheridan 1. Accordingly, removing the virtual average daily membership, the ADM, from our from how we statutorily calculate major maintenance, is going to have the highest impact on those 4 districts. If you look at the data and the sheets back behind there, you have, some of even your larger districts only have a handful of students, so it's not going to make much of a calculation change on those larger districts, but particularly these 4 districts are smaller districts, and in some cases, the high percentage of their ADM is actually in virtual students, so it would make a pretty substantial change in their overall calculations for major maintenance on their buildings. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Administrator Carlson.
Good morning.
Carlson, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Shelby Carlson, School Facilities Division Administrator. So just to walk through the data and the assumptions that we made and how we and looked at putting this report together for you. We did look at all 48 school districts. Charter schools were not included unless they were in district buildings. So you've got Snowy Range Academy in Laramie, Prairie View Community School using the Chugwater K-12. So those students were included. Virtual student proportionality and distribution. On October 1 of each year, we get total enrollments from the WDE. In addition, we get enrollment for virtual students. So we used that data to determine the proportion of students that were virtual and the proportion of students that were non-virtual, that were actually on site and in the school. So we used that percentage, which will come up a little bit later as we talk through this. We had to make some assumptions to do this report because with enrolled students that are virtual, we don't know the grade configuration. We don't know what grades they are. When we do our major maintenance calculation, we look at the average daily membership per building. And then we use that building's configuration because we have different utilization rates to determine how that major maintenance is calculated. Well, we don't know what the grade levels are of those students. So what we did was we just took it and we spread it evenly over all the schools because we don't know. So that's how.
So, Ms. Carlson, sorry to interrupt, but can you help me one more time on that? So we have a lot of virtual numbers out there. We're not exactly sure where they go. And so you decided to spread them out. Can you explain that one more time, just to make sure that I've got that?
Yeah. So if we were to look at Niobrara 1, right? They've got basically your 3 schools. They've got they got 2 schools, elementary and a middle school, high school. They got Lance Creek, but that's like 2 students. So we didn't look at that. We took that total number of virtual students and we spread them evenly, proportionally. So into the elementary school, 1/3, and then 2/3 into the middle school, high school.
Okay.
So to spread it across the buildings evenly. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that there's students from around the state that attend in other school districts, like Niobrara, I think was one of the first to have a lot of extra students virtually. Do you still see that happening? Are they getting credit for students that aren't even in their geographic district boundary?
I think that does occur because some are statewide. But we don't have any way of telling that. We just know they're enrolled in that program at that district and the data that we get.
So, yeah, good question, Representative. I look forward to all your thoughts on this. Ms. Carlson, this is This is a newcomer in the last few years, this particular policy. So
Yes.
please keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So one of our key factors is looking at the average daily membership. So I talked about those percentages earlier. So we looked at major maintenance using the total enrollment, which is the way we do major maintenance now, using that calculation with ADM configuration of those buildings, and we ran it that way. And then we determined the number of non-virtual students and applied them to those buildings as well, where they belonged. And then we, by putting that in there, then we subtracted, came up with our virtual numbers. ADM is not broken out by virtual, non-virtual. So there was no way for us to make that calculation other than just to proportional it out. Major maintenance calculator integration, the non-virtual ADM figures were input into the state major maintenance calculator model. Then we put in the non-virtuals and subtracted them out to get the virtual students. So if we look at the table there, you can see we got 23, 24, 25 there in the last column, and I did 26 both ways. Why? Because in 26, we paid major maintenance at the 135% of allowable square footage. So we're moving back to 115%. So I said, well, what would 2026 have looked like if we had paid it at 115%, since that's what we'll be doing this year? So that last line is really for comparison only. It's not actual numbers. Then the next column gives you what that percent multiplier of the CRV is, either 2 or 2.5%. Then the percent of allowable square footage, 115 to 135. And then as the director gave you the number of virtual programs that we have currently. And then that last column gives you the savings in major maintenance payments, or at least our estimate of the savings by removing the virtual student ADM. So you can see it goes up and down, 704,000 in 23, 924,000 in 24, 25, about 887,000. And then when we get to 2026, because we're paying 135%, we're picking up 17 districts that we're actually paying for their total actual square footage. So you actually see that amount of money that you save for virtual students drop down because we're paying more square footage with the 135%. So $655,000. And then my hypothetical for comparison purposes only, if we would have paid at 115%, it would have been about $1.3 million in savings that the state would have recognized removing those virtual students. And then I just have it in a bar graph below, just a different representation of that same data. Again, that 1.3 is not a negative number. I just showed it in red so you would understand that that was not an actual number, but just a comparison. And I did the same in the bar chart. And so then if you look through pages 3 through 7, it's just the different breakdown by year. So you can just see the year, you can see the CRV percentage, the 115%. You can see all of the enrollment and virtual and ADM data on the left side of those graphs. You see the adjusted educational square footage. Then you see the authorized square footage for the total ADM. And then you see the authorized square footage for the non-virtual ADM. And then the right column gives you the major maintenance dollars that would be tied to your virtual students. We added a column in there with an X, which just shows you which districts are getting paid for their actual square footage. And you'll see 3 of those are the major, if we look at 23, 3 of those are those major virtual programs. So you see Bighorn there, you see Niobrara, and you see Weston 7. Sheridan 1 actually did not have a virtual program in 2022 to 2023, which is the year that we are pulling the ADM data for. The other one you see in there is it's actually Sheridan 3 popped in there. I was thinking Fremont 38 comes in here pretty quick and pops in every year.
Mr. Chairman, one thing to note too, if you come back to page 2 of 7, and we're looking at those dollar figures on the savings, the 704 and the 900,000, note on those that 2% versus the 2.5. So had it been 2.5% like it is currently, then those savings would have been higher. So when you're trying to compare those numbers, like the 700,000 to the 1.2 theoretical for 26, that one in 26, that's a 2.5 versus a 2. So those numbers would have been higher had you had that 2.5 factor in there. So.
Okay, any questions? Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much physical space is used to handle virtual schools in those districts, or are they completely contracted out and there is no physical space required whatsoever?
Mr. Chairman,
Go
I
ahead,
do
Ms.
not know
Carl.
the answer to that question for sure. How much of their space is actually tied to the virtual program? Certainly something we can find out.
Ms. Carlson, I think that I'm going to take a stab at the bottom line of this entire discussion, which is, our job is to make sure that our school facilities are adequate to deliver the basket of goods. The virtual piece, as you can tell, remains cloudy for many of us to really know, what the impacts are, like the question that was just asked. What does it require of a district to provide this virtual education? And does it drive anything that this committee needs to be concerned with? In other words, so I appreciate your report thus far. It remains something a little difficult to get our arms around, right? So keep going. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. It's a little bit tough.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just to make sure that I'm tracking this correctly, on page 5, as an example, for fiscal year 2025, with 115% allowable, so that's before we enacted the 135. As I understand it, you've got the X's and the total authorized for total ADM kind of in the center there. And it looks like we've got 4 X's. So 4 districts were being funded at at full square footage. So their allowable square footage matched their square footage. And as I see it, other than Fremont 38, the other 3 are the 3 large enrollment virtual school districts. So we really were seeing a significant effect, or are seeing a significant effect, where the only districts that are able to have fully funded major maintenance on their total square footage are those 3 that have the significant student enrollments for virtual. So they're moving up their allowable square footage substantially to the point where it incorporates all of their square footage. Is that an accurate interpretation of what you're presenting there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that's correct.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Director.
I guess kind of a counter thought to that too. When we were looking at this data and we said, okay, if we take those virtual students out of there, what's that do to how much money they have? And then what percentage of students would they have in the building? And we're seeing statewide this decline in student population. And we've got some districts right now in some of their buildings, they're only like 30% full. So how do we keep that building going with the major maintenance when they're only getting 30% of their major maintenance costs to keep the building going? And in this case, with those 3 we're talking about, if you take those virtual students out of there because they're highly dependent upon it, I think one of them that we were looking at was down in that 30% range. So now those districts and their smaller districts are only going to get 30% of their major maintenance. And I think for our committee in the future to wrestle with is there maybe some minimum threshold outside of the current calculation of 135? Is there some minimum calculation we want to at least pay for a building, be it 50%, 60%, 70%, because it is not sustainable to keep a building at 30% major maintenance or 40. So I think something for us to look at in the future is what's that minimum? We're going to be talking later on in the bill about the 135, but even with the 135, because of those ADM decreases, that's still, we're going to have some areas, some schools that are not going to generate enough money to keep that school going.
Well, Director, I think given the charge of this select committee, I think you noticed that just like a bunch of horses, our ears came right straight forward on that because, you know, our job is to make sure that we're taking care of those facilities out there. And it does worry me when I hear that a district is running at 30% capacity. How does that generate through the ADM model? How does that generate enough money to take care of that building? Senator Tapp, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
morning.
thank you. Good morning, Director. Can we talk through just how the square footage is calculated as well in those buildings? Because I know certain things are counted against the school when you look at, when you're talking 30% of the building. And so the gymnasium itself is all square footage that's calculated as part of that system. And any bleacher system or more room you have around the gym also counts against your percentage of ADM. If you have a chemistry classroom or a biology classroom and you have the classroom and a lab, those two also, there's no allotment that allows for two spaces to run those classes and two different functions in those classes. And so if we look at that variation inside of each building, how dramatically does that change our percentage of use and occupancy?
Mr. Chairman, I'll let Mr. Rexis kind of address that. He's kind of the guru on some of those calculations, but.
Mr. Rexis,
Thank you,
good
Mr.
morning.
Chairman. John Rexis. I'm
Yeah.
Construction Management Supervisor for School Facilities. I think there's two things that come into play here. I don't know that you can necessarily just look at the total square footage of a building alone. I think you have to look at it in conjunction with the restricted capacity of that building too, and where your teaching stations are at, how that capacity ties in. But I guess, sorry, I'm struggling trying to follow the question a little bit. Are you suggesting maybe that if some of those spaces aren't educational spaces, that maybe that shouldn't count against their total square footage? Or could you clarify your question just a little bit, please?
Go ahead, Senator Tapp. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, so I'm just, as we talk through the percentages on a building and its occupancy level and how many students we can service in that building, when we're talking about different spaces like the two different lab and classroom areas, that lab area counts against that school then. So for the moment those kids are in science, they're actually only 50% occupancy of that total square footage. If they have a classroom connected to a lab, then those are two different sets of square footage. And so it has both parts are needed. And so when we're designing a school, do we need to be more efficient and have classrooms at the lab tables, or do we need to make exceptions that allow for that to occur?
Senator Love, my apologies. Called your first name.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Rexis.
Mr. Chairman, so if we have a lab in a school, we calculate that capacity differently. We allow 60 square foot per student. What you will often see is sometimes they will have their class right in that lab and they'll just do it concurrently. Sometimes they will have a classroom where we utilize the 37.5 square foot per student. If we go to CTE might be the best example, where we have an industrial space. That industrial space will drive capacity at 125 square foot per student. They usually will have a separated classroom, and we give them capacity for that classroom as well. So, probably in a small school, they probably wouldn't be using both at the same time. When you get in a larger district where they have a lot more students, they're going to have kids in that classroom and kids in the industrial space, and they may be flipping and flopping. The other thing they do is they may use that classroom for welding. They may use it for ag. They may use it for their engineering. So they get a lot of multiple uses out of that one CTE classroom where they're putting different groups in there. I think the other thing to remember is a lot of districts do have enhanced space at times. Those enhancements get subtracted out of the calculation before we start looking at their actual square footage.
Yep,
Senator
Mr. Chairman,
Love,
so the example of the gym, they're getting credit for the whole thing, whether there's bleachers in there or not. They're getting credit for that whole gym space in there.
Senator Lowe, good question. Any follow-up? You good? Okay, let's go to Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on that. So Senator Love's getting at the allowable square footage aspect. A lot of what you were just talking about was the restricted square footage. And when we're calculating the allowable square footage, are we going into restricted square footage, or are we just doing that on a broader ADM basis based on the grade band? Because I didn't think we were going to the level of detail for allowable square footage calculations as figuring out the programming for the classes for allowable square footage. I could be wrong, but I didn't think we were getting to that level of analysis. I thought we were basically, we'd calculate the gross square footage. We'd know what that is. We'd determine the allowable square footage based on ADM, and then we'd get our proportion. Are you going into a restricted capacity type analysis to determine the allowable square footage?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, you are correct in that the allowable is calculated. And I think if we look at Mr. Wilmarth's paper, and it is calculated based on ADM and that grade configuration. And that gives us our authorized square footage. And then that 115% is what then kicks us, it gives us allowable, and we multiply the 115%. But I think we were just trying to share that those spaces are still carrying capacity, and they are using them, but that which will affect that. I think when we get to Weston 7, you're going to see they're down there in that 24% of building usage.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, getting to Senator Love's question, that nuance of doubling lab space, that increases your total square footage that you need to cover, but it doesn't enter into the calculation for allowable square footage. They don't look at the programming of it. So the allowable is going to be calculated in ADM and grade band only. So yeah, I think what you're getting at there is that it can end up being a liability because you've effectively got, we'll say, double the space that you need to have major maintenance for. But based on how we're calculating on a per ADM basis, we don't account for the major maintenance for that. Is that what you're getting at, Senator?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Senator Love, any thoughts on that? Any follow-up?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Rothfuss, Chairman. So that's exactly what I was getting at is, as we've looked at schools in the past and schools in our school districts, we've noticed that we have a lot of square footage, but the actual usable square footage or dual space inside of a district really counts against us quite a bit. And so when we talk about a school district having 24 or 30% use, are we taking into consideration any of that space that is actually a shared area or dual use area? And so that was my biggest question. Are we comparing apples to apples on everything? When a school's maximizing 100%, I would guess that school looks pretty crowded during the day while they're using it, because they've consumed 100% of their building, which means they probably have students stuck in a lot of different places that would like to have a little more elbow room. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator.
Chairman,
Nice to have that perspective that you
Yeah.
bring from years on the on the school board.
Yeah,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I think probably the simplest way to look at it is you have your overall building size. And particularly if you look at some of your older schools, pre-Campbell, they were probably in many cases more generous on the square footage. But we calculate the square footage based on the grade configuration, i.e. 50 square foot or 40 square foot or whatever, CTE spaces, 125 square foot. So we're figuring that square footage. So these older buildings, depending on the number of students really drives it. It isn't that they have extra rooms or whatever. We calculate all the rooms in the building. So if you only had 10 senior or 10 people in math and you had 5 math rooms, we're still calculating that capacity for the building. They just don't have enough students to put in there, which then lowers that number down to that 30% or whatever it may be, just based on their students. So at some day, if they fill all those rooms up, they're going to be at the 100%. They'll be getting the 100% or 115% of. So it really what the driver is the number of students that you have in a school.
Thank you, Director. That, yeah, you're talking about Sheridan and Powell and Riverton. I think Evanston snuck in under the wire down there. Yeah, good stuff. I want you to keep going because we've got things to consider ahead here. Ms. Carlson, thank you. Appreciate you trying to answer some of the questions as we go along.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I really was just going to comment a little bit on page 6. Here you can see where we have applied the 135% to the fiscal year 2026 payment. And so now when you look at that column where the X's are, you can see that we have got 17 districts there that are actually getting paid for their adjusted educational square footage. So they're getting 100% for that adjusted square footage amount. And so it covers a lot more schools. You can see which schools there are. One thing I did think I might mention too, is I noticed on that page 5, and you see it, I think on page 4 as well, is Fremont 38 comes in there as getting 100%. Fremont 38 is kind of an anomaly in that they have their 9 through 12 is a charter school. This is the only 9-12 in that district. They are in a building that is 100% enhanced. So those students are residing in an enhancement. And by the way, the calculation works, enhanced space comes out. And that's why they come in and hit at 100%, because those students are all in enhanced space, which we lose. So they get covered at 100%. So that's why you see
Fremont
that.
38, Ms. Carlson, is
Arapahoe.
Washakie?
Arapahoe.
Arapahoe. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that really was all I was going to cover. I think the next page just shows that comparison only of what it would have been at 426 if we were at 115% of allowable. So with that, I'd stand for any further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Carlson. Let's, committee, are there any questions with what's been brought up so far? Okay, let's move along. Next up, we do have 27 LSO 125 to consider this morning. And Ms. Heitrick, it's good to see you. If you'd be willing to come and walk us through this proposed legislation. Ms. Catherine, good morning. Ms. Heitrick, before you walk us through this legislation, do you have any final thoughts on what we just bounced around? Anything that you can add to help clear the fog for me.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, the Operations Administrator for the Legislative Service Office. I'm also the attorney for the various education committees. I think the state construction did a fabulous job of kind of outlining some of the issues facing virtual education. And I will discuss a couple of more items, sort of a nuanced approach that might need to be considered by the committee in elimination of those virtual education students. The one thing that I would say is in counting those virtual education students, it's an October 1st snapshot instead of the ADM, which is typically utilized for those calculations. And in that, the removal is 100% virtual education students. And what that means is if you're a full-time virtual education student, if you attend virtual education 51% of the time or more, you are considered full-time. And I think that is the population that they're removing. And so just consider if that student actually attends virtual education only 51% of the time, but is in brick and mortar the other 49%, it's possible they may need facilities available to them in generating these calculations. So the bill uses a rather blunt instrument because that is the only data we have available at this point, but it might be worth the committee's consideration of a more nuanced sort of sliding scale to account for that. And so I will
No,
also.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Heitrick. No, thanks. That's very well put. And that was kind of, one of the push points of the entire discussion was, virtual, charter, stay at home, all the things that we're getting into now. We still have buildings to take care of, and we still have many of those students wanting and being allowed to use the buildings. So, well put. Senator Rothfuss.
On that point, Ms. Heitrick, when we're determining a virtual student versus a traditional student, the 50% point is the cut, right? So if we were to, for example, I'll say we have the number of virtual enrollments arbitrarily instead of using the entire virtual enrollments, I think at that point in time, we could be confident that we weren't doing a disservice to the district, because if they switched from virtual more than 50% to bricks and mortar, they would be counted on the ADM side and not counted anymore on the virtual side. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I don't know the answer to that question, but what I can say is in statute, there are two definitions in 2113-330. And so you're basically a full-time or a part-time, and there's no sort of fractional in between that. And so anyone less than 50% is considered a part-time virtual education, and anything more than that is considered full-time virtual education. And with regard to how that translates into ADM for those students that are less than 50%, I don't have the answer to that question, which I think is what you're asking.
Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
And we're not collecting that on a virtual versus bricks and mortar ADM basis anywhere. So we can't say virtual ADM and bricks and mortar ADM. We just say ADM, I think. Is that accurate?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we had a lot of conversations with the state construction department about that fact. And that was sort of the disconnect in trying to draft the bill, is that the only thing that you have with relation to virtual education is that October 1st snapshot.
Yeah.
And so that's the information that we used.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
Captain
go ahead.
Camerati. LSO Budget
Good to see
Fiscal.
you.
Good to see you too. Can I just make one quick comment on the virtual education? So on the Wyoming Department of Education site, there is a report where you can pull virtual education or virtual enrollment versus brick and mortar enrollment by grade for 2025, 2026, back to 2017, 2018. So our figures, we have to use a projection out. So we use that at 98%. We use the virtual enrollment at 98% as a proxy for ADM. So the state construction department did a great job, but we do have those figures by grade, by school.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate that. Ms. Heitrick, please proceed. Thanks for letting me interrupt for a minute. Take it away.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, in your packet, you have a 27 LSO, a 125 working draft 4, K-12 school facilities routine and major maintenance. Recall at your last meeting, you directed staff to resurrect a former bill that's been an old friend of the legislature and has actually been operationalized a number of times, increasing the allowable square footage from 115% to 135%. That provision has sunsetted, and so the committee's instruction was to ensure that both routine maintenance and major maintenance have that increased figure for allowable square footage. And then the second, and the one that has been substantially discussed this morning, is to eliminate those virtual education students also from the allowable gross square footage. And so with that, I'll go ahead and walk the bill. Section 1 amends 2113-309. This is the routine maintenance calculation. And then secondly, it amends 2115-109, which is the major maintenance calculation. And so beginning on page 2, you'll see that first statute that I noted, 2113-309, and the substance of the amendment can actually be found on page 3. First on lines 4 through 6. This is where you'll note that the gross square footage calculation is reduced by full-time virtual education students as defined in 2113-330. That's that definition that I previously mentioned. And then secondly, the second policy decision can be found on lines 7 and 8. This is the increase of from 135, 135%. 115% to 135%. And then on page 3, lines 12, this begins the amendments for the major maintenance calculation. And continuing on to page 5, line 12. And the substance of the amendment can be found in 2 places. The first is on page 4, lines 20 and 21. This operationalizes the removal of the virtual education students. And then on to page 5, lines 8 through 10. This is the increase of allowable square footage from 115% to 135%. Section 2, this is where the appropriations are contained in subsection A. It appropriates $15,970,000 from the Public School Foundation Program account to the State Construction Department for purposes of payment of that increased major maintenance. This is just for that school year 27-28, and then from there on after, it would be included in their regular budget as an operation of law. Moving on to the next page in subsection B on lines 5 through 15. This is the appropriation of $4,750,000, again, from the Public School Foundation Program account to the Department of Education School Finance Unit for purposes of payment of those increased routine maintenance payments. Section 3, on page 6, lines 17 through 20. This just ensures that that the changes are applicable for school year 27-28 and each school year thereafter. That's important because on page 6, line 22, section 4, and on to page 7 provides that the act is effective immediately. That just eliminates any ambiguity as to the effective date. And subject to your questions and members of the committee, and I would also turn it over to Ms. Camerati if she has additional comments on the bill.
Any further comments, Catherine? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do not. Thank
Okay.
you.
Appreciate your help and work on this legislation. Any questions, committee, on LSO 125? We're taking this bill into consideration as to whether we would forward it on later today. Any questions? Okay. Oh, Senator Love.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As we look at the calculations, when we talk about reducing these and we have buildings that are 25-30% occupancy, in our statutory requirement to fund education, if we're only funding a building at 25 or 30%? Are we meeting our obligation?
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Heitrich, you're one of the perfect ones to answer that one.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Love, in my opinion, yes. This has been an ongoing, I guess these changes to major maintenance have a long history. And so we began at a certain square footage, recognizing when the state took over that individual districts had built their buildings according to whatever standards they had specified. And so in taking over the process of that after the Campbell cases, the state recognized that there was sort of this inequity. And that is sort of the basis and the underpinning of the Campbell cases is inequity in educational facilities and in educational opportunities. And so in an effort to sort of level the playing field, they started with a higher percentage and then kind of worked their way down with the lowest percentage being, I think, 115%. I get the policy issue with regard to square footage that exists on the ground. It's complicated as, as anything is in education law. There are districts that bonded for enhancements and included within that the maintenance provisions for that. And so is that equitable if you suddenly have other districts that have enhancements that, don't have that same fund set aside? May create an inequity, but it is a nuanced and very difficult policy decision and becomes more complicated with the declining enrollment.
Senator, any follow-up? It's a good question. Anything else, committee? Ms. Heitrich, thank you. Appreciate your help this morning. It takes us through what we have on the agenda for major maintenance. I'm going to allow for Ms. Camera, did you have anything?
Mr. Chairman, I can certainly walk through that memo if you so desire, but we do have quite a full
Thank
agenda
you
and
for
it's
that
up to you.
reminder. Yeah, we should cover that before we go to public comment. So yes, please do that. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much and good morning. The purpose of this memorandum, which is meeting material 2-03, is to provide some follow-up from our meeting in May. Mainly, we're going to talk about what the impact of ADM is. So if we think back to our May meeting, one of my big educational takeaways was that two-stream funding concept. So we're going to kick it off with the K-12 major maintenance formula in ADM. So if we walk back through the formula, our total allowable educational square footage is determined by taking the lesser of the actual square footage amount or the allowable square footage amount multiplied by some percentage. In this case, it's 115%. And this is kind of where ADM comes into play is in this part of the calculation, the allowable. So for every school building the state maintains, as we know, the K-12 major maintenance formula uses the prior school year's ADM and their grade configuration of the school building to generate a prescribed square footage amount, which is updated annually and is a part of the statewide building adequacy standards. So if you're looking at the online materials, there's a link at the bottom on footnote 1 to see what that allowable square footage calculator looks like. And it's quite prescribed and quite in-depth. So if you wanted to look at that, that's specifically how we derive the prescribed amount. So kind of tough to visualize, but imagine you have an elementary school with 330 students and it has a prescribed footage amount of 47,735 square feet. Let's say that elementary school loses like 80 students. The K-12 major maintenance formula will regenerate the prescribed footage amount at an educational square footage of about 38,988. which is then multiplied by 115% to arrive at that total of 44,836. Well, that's still less than the 47,735 that's now being funded. So when ADM goes down, the prescribed footage goes down. When it goes up, the prescribed footage goes up. But it may not be the actual square footage. So the actual square footage will always remain the same unless something happens to the building or the state, it gets updated and it changes. But part of the task was to see the magnitude of the impact. So figure 1 on the top of page 2 compares the actual authorized and prescribed square footage. So we could start by kind of looking at the gap between our prescribed, or I see it as like a dynamic calculation, as compared to our actual gross educational square footage and authorized. So since school year 2009, 2010, the percentage of building adequacy standards, the 115%, has kind of remained the same. So we can't necessarily really blame that on the gap. And then we see in 2025, 2026 school year, it jumps up. So the two are kind of following the same trend. And then we have this big spike when we changed the 115% to 135. And our gap is much smaller and then drops back down. So the graph kind of tells me two things. For quite some time on a statewide basis, the gap between actual gross square footage and what's being funded has either widened a little bit or has kind of stayed in the same trend line. And that changing 115% to 135 is really the key. So figure 2, starting on the top of page 3, is also interesting. It compares the actual educational square footage as a percentage of the allowable square footage as a part of the adequacy standards. So that's kind of a lot of words to essentially say that at any given point, the red and blue lines should meet for the amount of actual gross square footage to be funded by the authorized gross square footage. So if you want to fund all the actual, those two lines should come together. So starting at the bottom of page 3 and moving on to page 4, figure 3 then illustrates what is our ADM doing. Well, for context, I'm going to give like an overview of about the last 12 years, and then we can take a look at a more recent example starting in table 1. Honestly, you really could pick any time to do this analysis. 12 years is kind of nice because it's halfway between when the statewide adequacy standards were adopted to now. So everything should be kind of uniform and functioning at this point. It also happens to show some interesting things going on. So we'll talk about that. So over the past 12 years, not at a constant rate, but ADM has decreased statewide by about 8.5%, with 39 districts seeing decreases. And in that same period, 21 school districts have experienced a decrease in actual educational square footage, and 27 have seen an increase. So 7 of the districts experiencing increases in the actual square footage are seeing an increase of 10% or more since 2015, 2016. So just looking back 10 years. Again, the 10% is just kind of like an illustrative cutoff figure. This also hits one of the key problems with school facilities, is that each district has their own unique set of circumstances. And so a one-size-fits-all can be super challenging for policy considerations. There's a lot going on. Statewide, it may look like there's an increase, but certain districts are decreasing and increasing. So why is this relevant to us right now? And why would we even talk about this? Well, we've been experiencing a decline in ADM for about 4 years, and we continue to have the tension, as shown by figures 1 and 2, where the gap between actual educational square footage and what's being authorized or prescribed is wide, or just kind of staying the same. So looking at 10 years ago, which is a nice round number, which is what table 1 is doing, kind of 10 years is a nice reference point. We can think back to what was going on. For estimated school year 2026, 2027, 42 school districts' actual educational square footage exceeded the statewide building adequacy standards by more than 115%, meaning these districts require that percentage to be increased to fund it all. 8 school districts in particular exceed the statewide building adequacy standards by more than 175%. And table 1 is an illustrative tool that takes a look at what that actually looks like as compared to 10 years ago. So those 8 districts being Converse 2, Fremont 14, Park 6, and so on. So for example, and I'm sort of picking on Fremont 21 here, but Fremont 21 has experienced the greatest increase in educational gross square footage by 69.5% from school year 2015, 2016, while it also experienced a 22.1% decrease in ADM at that same time. Similar story for Park number 6, Sublet 9, and Sweetwater number 2. So it's just to take a look at what's been going on and some of these sort of more extreme examples in the last 10 years where we see increasing actual square footage and decreases in ADM. In Appendix A, you can find your favorite district for estimated 2026, 2027 for the actual prescribed and authorized educational building square footage amounts, and just sort of see what the gap is or if one exists. It doesn't have that 10-year comparison, but it's just to show, hey, this is what's happening now and this is why we care. So kind of to wrap this discussion up and to answer the impact of ADM on the calculation, ADM is responsive when adjusting the prescribed square footage. As I said, when ADM goes down, the prescribed square footage goes down. But maybe that's not so great for the actual square footage, or it's not being funded. What really has more of an impact is that percentage. When we change the percentage from 115 to 120 to 135, that really shows in the calculation. So I don't believe, unless you'd like to, we need to go over the impacts of the bill. I certainly can, but
Mr.
we.
Chairman,
Senator Dockstader.
follow up on a comment you made. You had select districts that said these particular districts have more footage or more space because of ADM. Do you recall, was it because we anticipated significant growth in these specific areas, but maybe it didn't occur?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstader, I really can't speak to either the state construction's determination of how the decision to make more square footage. There is an enrollment projection methodology for determining if we need to build another building or not. But I think it would require mostly comment from the district or the state construction department. Thank you so
Mr.
much.
Chairman.
Good question. Anything else, committee? Catherine, I would appreciate any thoughts you have on the legislation. We're going to take public comment too. If you'd like to jump over and provide any thoughts with regard to the legislation, the impact, we would love to hear it. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Absolutely. So changing that 115% to 135% will help fund more of the actual square footage if that's the intent of the legislature. If you choose to consider both the virtual enrollment and the 135%, it's about a combined impact of 15.9 million on the K-12 major maintenance formula. And then for routine, it's about a 4.8 million impact. If you choose to split the virtual enrollment out for whatever reason, you won't get the benefit from the savings of that. So it's kind of, it's not that much savings. So our estimated impact for school year 2027-28 on just the virtual enrollment was a savings on the major maintenance formula of 1.35, and on routine it would be about 310,000.
So Catherine, thank you for those thoughts. I think what the 135 would do is further insulate those districts from that ADM calculation. Isn't that correct? I mean, that assures more of a major maintenance payment going to those facilities out there, regardless of what enrollments are doing. Do I have that right?
Mr. Chairman, I would say yes, the magnitude of changing the percentage will be greater than what ADM is going to do to the calculation and will help fund more actual footage. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. Any further comments, Ms. Heitrick, before you
No, Mr. Chairman.
leave us? Okay. Thank you both very much. It's good stuff. Let's go to public comment on major maintenance. Mr. Chairman, do you have anything for the good of the cause this morning before we go to anyone else? or any of you commissioners? We always welcome any thoughts you guys have. Thank you. Any public comment on either the bill that we are considering or the general topic of K-12 major maintenance? Good morning. And good to see you. Been a little while.
Chairman. Been a while.
Good morning. Please
Thank-
introduce
thank-
yourself.
Thank you for all your years of service and how you've helped schools and all the good things you've done. So, I mean, I think everybody very much appreciates
Thank you for
your
that.
hard work.
I appreciate those kind words.
My name is Kirk Schmidt. I was a business manager for school districts for 39 years. And having been through this is kind of deja vu all over again, because when you look at the evolution of what created this problem, when you, anything driven by ADM is going to have an impact on funding. And when this all started, Mr. Chairman, if you recall, there at one point early on, there were several different iterations of how the calculation came into play on how schools were built, how big they were. There was, I don't even remember which school it was, but there was one elementary school that was constructed that when they moved in, they were over capacity.
I think it was Cowley.
Yeah, whichever one it was, but everybody hit the panic button and go, oh, wait a minute. So then it swung the other way. So then we started building buildings that were based on very enthusiastic projections, I guess is the way to put it. So when you look at that list, if you went back and looked at the calculation of how many students were projected at the time, they probably never hit that number, which creates a big problem. You have to take care of the building. I mean, and there were two parts to that. Do you take smaller school districts like Ten Sleep and Matitsi? They didn't generate enough major maintenance money to even replace a roof. So then you swing to component funding. So the whole thing, it comes down to, okay, if it's all ADM driven, and Mr. Chairman, I agree with you, the 135% is certainly going to help that. But a building's a building's a building.
Right.
And whether it's major maintenance or routine maintenance, you're going to have the same impact. And forever and a day, we tried to explain to people, okay, if you lost half the students out of a building, you still have to clean the bathrooms, you still have to clean the hallways, you still have to take care of the HVAC system. The costs don't go away because the building is going to stay there. So then when you start decreasing it just based on enrollment, there has to be a floor at some point because there's a minimum amount of both major maintenance and routine maintenance that is necessary to maintain that facility. And I'm guessing that in the vast majority of the communities in Wyoming, the schools are the largest commercial building in that community, and you have to take care of it. And I can tell you from my years, if you start letting something go down, you're going to hear about it, and it is not going to be pleasant. And school boards are going to hear about it, and legislators are going to hear about it. One of the issues that was very difficult for us to get everybody to understand is you have to take care of a building. If you have a brand new building, the first 3 years are probably worse to take care of it than the next 3 years. So you're still going to be using some major maintenance money potentially on a brand new building, just because hindsight's 20/20. You're going to run into problems that you didn't anticipate when you built the building. So you still have to do it. So the age of facility doesn't even matter, but you still have to take care of it. So I would just urge you to look and be careful about, now that we're in a downward trend on ADM, where you still got to take care of the building. Yeah. And those costs today are astronomical. I mean, it is the cost of construction and maintaining stuff right now. I don't think anybody 10 years ago would have projected what those costs are. I mean, you're at a point right now where when you bid out a roof, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you had 3 or 4 vendors. Now, if you get one, you're lucky. So the whole thing is very dynamic and it's not getting cheaper, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Good comments as always, Mr. Smith. Thank you. Appreciated your kind words as well. And it's always good to hear from you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Any further comment? We would welcome anybody from the public that might want to come up and talk to us about major maintenance. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Matt Flett, Chief Financial Officer in the Natrona County School District. Really support this bill. I think this bill is well drafted. It handles the virtual enrollment item you guys are trying to tackle, and then increases the square footage to from 115 to 135. I think it's a great bill. The Natrona County School District supports it. Well done. Thanks for your work on that.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else? Does anyone else want to come forward? Going once, going twice. Okay, we'll close public testimony. Committee, let's take up consideration of LSO 125. Do I have a motion on the bill? Moved by Senator Dockstader, seconded by Representative Heft. Was that you? Representative Gunnergy. Thank you. All right. Committee comments on 125. Madam Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to discuss, the virtual enrollment piece is pretty complex and we don't even have a grasp on it without knowing what our enrollment is as of October 1. That kind of concerns me. And I wish we had somebody from one of the virtual schools here to testify, but we don't. But I think we need to give that a little more thought. My recommendation would be to pull that piece out, move forward the 135%. Like, we've had a draft bill before. We had it last year, move that ahead, but pull the virtual piece out for this time.
Madam Vice Chairman, thank you. Good suggestion. The other option that we do have, committee, my thought is that we probably want to forward the bill today if we are so inclined, but we don't have to. We have a third meeting in October. If we pull this ADM piece and we get more comfortable later, we can always put it back in. Does that make sense to everyone?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr.
Tell
Chairman.
me if that made any sense.
It makes sense, but I don't know that it's accurate.
I've never worried about that.
If we take it out, I don't think we'll have room in the title to necessarily make that change. If we leave it in, we'll have room in the title. And that would be the one consideration. I agree with the co-chairman, though, that I don't feel totally comfortable with where we're at on virtual. I absolutely agree with the concept. I was hoping for some public comment on it also. We don't have a clear way to isolate that population with certainty so that the subtraction is accurate. So we're kind of ballparking it a little bit and should actually end up being inaccurate, candidly, based on how it's calculated, because we don't know what percentage of the full-time virtual education students are truly 100% of the time, because that's anything between 50% and 100% is full-time. I don't know where that averages out, candidly. I would think that it would mostly be 100%, I would think, but it certainly isn't accurately true. So I'm inclined to move forward the 135% and separate these issues. And what we could then do potentially would be to ask that we have a separate bill draft for the next meeting where we separate it out and we try and get better public comment on it. So we put one issue to bed, the 135%, have a separate bill and sort that out. And I think that's good strategically anyway, even though sometimes we like to have one bill. We've got a general session coming up. The 135%, that that's just a critical item. We need to pass that. We need to get that done. It would be a shame if somehow we lost it because we were dealing with the virtual and there was concerns about the virtual. So I agree with the co-chairman. I think, and that's an easy amendment. Obviously it's 2 deletions, so that there's no problem with separating that out. So yeah, my inclination would be to separate it, pass the 135 today, and have another bill carried over for the next consideration that allows us to dig into that a little bit more deeply and see if we can get a better answer for this session.
Senator, thank you. And I think pending a little further discussion here, I'm going to come back to the vice chairman on what I think was a motion that she thought she was going to bring. And then I kind of like the idea of motioning that we go ahead and bring another bill related to the virtual piece. And we can take that up in October at that time. You know, it strikes me on this virtual piece, the part that I can't get arms around, I was talking with a family in Casper, a couple of weeks ago. They were interested in virtual and where they could get their student involved. And of course, I mentioned Bighorn and Niobrara, and, we've got schools that do that. Well, if that student jumps on, say at Niobrara, we send major maintenance money to Niobrara. But that particular student is going to be using the facilities in Natrona. So that's not helping Natrona, the gymnasium or the football field or anything that we've got to maintain. So that's the part that drives me crazy in the middle of the night. I think, well, how are we going to get arms around what we're doing on this virtual front? So I agree. We don't know enough today. So Representative Geringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I agree that we ought to not just throw it out, but have a separate bill draft. And I guess my inclination is to look at that as a sliding scale rather than a hard, fast 51%, for the consideration and use that percentage as part of the calculation. Obviously, that means more data. And if we need more data, we might as well be looking at the geographic location of that student and be able to put, if they are using the brick and mortar, put that major maintenance toward their home school. And so I think that would be a part of it. Obviously, that gets a little more complicated. But I think in order to treat this fairly, that's the kind of information that we need and the kind of, in my opinion, the kind of approach we need to take.
Madam Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to comment on this because I actually had this happen this week with a student in our district that will be using one of the virtual school programs and then will be attending music class at the brick and mortar in her town. So and there's an MOU that has to be signed between both superintendents. They know that. And I think we can get that data, especially with, there's just not a huge amount of kids. Right now, we're looking at about 2,400 students enrolled in virtual school that we know of. I know October 1 will come about and it'll probably go up a little bit. But I think with those superintendents, we will have an idea of what classes they're using. And I agree, there should be some fairness there. And I think we could probably need to do that with adequacy. So I think I would definitely entertain that, where we put that into another bill, study it, and definitely get some comments from our virtual schools on that for sure.
So Madam Vice Chairman, good thoughts. And I think the committee may want to consider, this may take an interim. This may take, next year to work all this through. We'll have to see, but Madam Vice Chairman, I think you maybe had a motion that I would entertain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to motion that we push through the 135%, but eliminate the virtual school piece at this time. And if we need staff to give them leeway on how to do that, I would motion that in the one big motion.
That goes to the bottom of page 4, I believe, committee. And we would strike that language and then give leeway to staff for any conforming. Does that make sense, Ms. Heidrich?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think there are two places in the bill that will delete both in the routine and the major maintenance, and then we'll conform the appropriations to account for the increase with this. The only question I have is, this motion is just relative to the 135%. Will you be discussing the virtual education piece? Is that going to be a separate discussion? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I anticipate, Ms. Heitrick, that motion would come after this one. So any further discussion on that motion? Is everybody, second by Senator Dockstader. Thank you for that. Somebody else may have, and I missed it. Any further discussion? Everybody understand the motion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Any opposed, no. That's unanimous. We will strike that language. We're back on the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything else on the bill? Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would just say that when you do advance this bill at 135 is not enough. And I just think it's important for us to keep saying that. We hear that 135 is not enough. We understand that 135 is not enough. I think it's an appropriate thing for us to move forward with. We have to be thoughtful in terms of moving forward legislation that has a strong chance of passing. We've established the 135 previously. It's going to be a process to get us to the point where we're appropriately and fully covering major maintenance for schools based on the square footage that they need. So I'm going to support this motion, and maybe we can have more discussion as we get into the legislative session, whether that needs to be tweaked or not. But it's a great move forward, and I think it's critical that we get something done of this magnitude. So
Mr.
this is a
Chairman.
good place to be.
Mr. Chairman, while we're on that topic, a little more discussion from the senator where he would like to see that as we move into the session. So we know what we're working with as we go back to work.
Senator, thank
Yeah,
you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator
to
Rothfuss.
respond to that, 175% really captures, it was like 96% of the square footage, and then doesn't have the outliers. That's, we've got it from last time. It was like $7 or $8 million more dollars. I think, I can't remember what it was. Maybe Matt knows up. It was in the memo from last time, so we can look that up. That pretty much does it in terms of matching the allowable square footage to the programmed square footage, and is probably the objective we would want, but it increases the price tag rather significantly. And so if we want to try and strive for that during session, I think that's a good one to bring as an amendment and try and up that, whether it's in committee or on the floor. But I would worry about endangering the bill. I think we need to get to 135, which makes a big difference for almost every district in the state, and improves where we're at. So that would be my thinking. Aspiration would be 175. I don't think it's easy to get there.
Yeah, hope that helps. Let's go to Senator Love, and then I'll come right back. Representative, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to Senator Rothfuss's point, so every building has a fixed cost of what it takes just to keep the building functional and working. And maybe rather than take every building to 175%, is it possible to create a floor based on ADM so that we maintain those buildings that lack the enrollment at the time, but we don't spend a lot of excess funds for schools that meet their 100% or close to their 100% requirement? And so that's one of my thoughts on that. The other question, I kind of a follow-up that I had, and I just didn't think of it fast enough, is once the SFD was formed and we as a state started helping navigate the guidelines of building a school, does the same answer apply when the school districts didn't make 100% of the decisions on funding school construction and the state was involved in that decision-making process?
Ms. Heitrick?
That's certainly, Mr. Chairman and Senator Love, that's a great question. And one I don't fully have the answer to, but from a high level sort of legal framework, your requirement is to provide uniform, equitable, and adequate school facilities. And so I think, this sort of blunt instrument, for lack of a better word, does ensure equity across the board. But certainly there's a recognition that some of these schools were built according to the adequacy standards, have declining enrollment, and now have excess square footage. And as Ms. Camerati alluded to, each district has their own scenario as to where they're at and how they got there and what their total square footage is. And then I think Mr. Wilmarth has a point in response to your first comment.
Mr. Wilmore?
Yeah,
Good
Mr.
morning.
Chairman, good morning.
ahead.
Members of the committee, Matthew Wilmarth, LSO Budget Fiscal Deputy Administrator. With regards to the floor is the lesser of the two amounts, which is the actual square footage or 115% of the allowable square footage. So that is the floor. In some instances, it is certainly a fraction of their actual square footage. So in the case of
Any follow-up?
Weston number
Good.
7,
Yeah.
I think is an example. You know, even with the virtual education, their actual square footage is 116,539. Their prescribed is 164,141. But if you remove half of those ADM under the virtual education, their actual square footage is one half of their, or their prescribed educational square footage is one half of their actual. So that is the floor, but it is a fraction of their total educational square footage. That's, I think, responsive to your question, but I don't know if, certainly your max under your proposed bill is 135%. If you want to set a floor under the actual square footage, that's an alternative request or suggestion. We don't have estimates on what that is. So in the case of these districts with much more square footage than what the prescribed or the authorized commission standards are, that could be, a policy option. We could run those numbers and have that discussion at the next meeting. We just haven't explored that.
Senator Love, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Wilmore, thank you. So when I think about a floor, I'm just thinking about the actual dollars it takes to maintain that building, regardless of how many, every building has a number of what it takes to keep it alive. And so is there a way to come up with that for each one of our facilities? And those are going to vary based on square footage and different resources inside of those buildings. But if it was possible to create a floor for every structure of minimum maintenance to keep it alive, if we think 175% may be closer, we may find some cost savings in setting a floor for buildings that don't achieve that requirement of maintenance just to keep the building alive. And so that, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm thinking.
I think it does, and I think that's part of the overall discussion that's probably going to take place going forward. Beyond today's consideration of this bill, Senator, but good thoughts. Representative Geringer, you had something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's really right along the same lines as Senator Love. If we look at it as, say, no less than, say, 85% of the actual square footage, use that as the floor, then we can take out those major drops in ADM and not have that drop off completely. Whereas if we go with, say, 175% on the calculation, we're really bumping up all of them. So I guess what I'm thinking with that floor is to say that we're not going to let you go any less than, but we can still factor in the 135 and have it be somewhat adequate for what we're talking about to get major maintenance up, if that makes sense.
I think it does. Representative Preventa.
Mr. Chairman, I think when we're talking about a floor, I'm a little concerned about what that means for equitability across the state. If you have a floor and some schools are getting the floor, but then however we calculate it ends up getting more, you have unequal distribution of how we're funding those, the major maintenance. And so I think the concern is like 135 is potentially would take care of what we're considering a floor. And if you say 135 is the floor, but this school district might need to get more, that's where you're introducing constitutional problems, I would think. So I think the bill that we have, the 135, gets us started.
Yeah.
And we revisit it, and it keeps us in line with what the courts would be looking at. So I hear the concerns of the floor that this is messier than we would like it to be in terms of how we fund major maintenance. But that little blue book, we want to make sure we stay in line with that. And then maybe there is some way to figure out how we do the rest of it, but I think it's more complicated than what we're able to discuss today. And that we don't necessarily have answers available to us, but we know that this is something that's been a problem, as we saw from the 10-year, the graphs that we got from LSO today. So I would urge this committee to move this bill forward. I'm more than eager to solve difficult problems with you and figure out what solutions look like. And consider me a partner in doing that, but I would stick to 135 right now.
So really appreciate all the comments this morning. I think they're spot on. I just want to thank the committee. It's been about 10 years since Senator Rothfuss and we were the primary two who started, I think, realizing that we weren't doing an adequate job on this maintenance front. We just simply weren't. We had dropped it down, and we dropped it down too far. And we've been working ever since that time to share that message. Our agency folks have helped us immensely on that front. Appreciate that. And we're finally today here to a point where I think we can forward something that just makes sense. We can get this in place. You can consider it during the session. I think there's work to be done beyond that. And several of you have touched on that. We can cross that bridge a little bit later, but I'm going to support the bill and hope you will too. Is there anything further on it? Okay, let's do a roll call on 27 LSO 125.
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is a motion to sponsor 27 LSO 125 K-12 school facilities routine and major maintenance as amended. Senator Dockstader. Senator Love. Senator McEwen.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss. Representative Bratton.
Aye.
Representative Geringer. Representative Heft. Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Vice Chair Angelos.
Aye.
Chairman Andrew, or sorry, wrong committee. Chairman Landon.
Aye.
My apologies. That is 10 ayes.
All right. That bill will go on to the legislative session then. And I think Senator Rothfuss maybe had a motion that he said he would want to bring.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Rothfuss.
I would move that we bring legislation to the next draft legislation to the next committee meeting for consideration that is effectively the remainder of the bill as it relates to virtual education for our consideration.
Seconded by Senator Dockstader. Discussion. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, we'll take a look at that piece separately, and that'll give time, as the vice chairman said, we will find out more by October 1st with regard to enrollment numbers, et cetera. And we'll take a look at that at the end of October. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I think when we have the conversation, I would just like some more understanding at that meeting about what the definition should be, right? I don't think the 50% cutoff makes sense and might harm some districts over others. So I don't know if that's a directive necessarily for folks that bringing public comment or LSO, but I would just like to see more information about that.
Mr. Wilmark.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza. The issue with the definition is we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The virtual education or the full-time definition has a purpose on the kind of on the educational programming side. And the purpose on that was to identify for really assessment purposes, those students that are receiving a majority of their educational program through a virtual education program. And the purpose was to trying to disaggregate those results for assessment purposes into their own kind of grouping. Trying to precise this virtual education student, and I'm not dissuading the committee one way or another, but the data that is collected currently is not used for kind of this purpose. We can certainly bring the Department of Education in to see how granular they can precise this data. I think that's an appropriate request of them to come and identify how many of these students are taking, on a more precise level, these courses in person at a facility, or are they residing outside of the district boundaries? The one thing we, trying to associate a student's enrollment with another district's square footage, the example in Natrona County, but they may be enrolled in a school district outside of Natrona County. Our school finance system doesn't really work in that manner, trying to associate funding to their resident district, even though they're enrolled they're not in a non-resident district. So that's a little messy. So yeah, happy to, continue that conversation. The other thing we have written down is to bring back kind of the floor concept and see how many districts, if you were to allocate 85% as a floor, whatever that threshold is. But the virtual education, again, we're just trying to fit that definition into a school facility realm, which isn't really the purpose of that data collection at this moment. We can certainly precise it or direct the executive branch to precise that, but that's a little hard right now to look at that.
Mr. Chairman.
Makes sense. Senator, go ahead.
And with regard to that circumstance, that scenario where you've got a student in Natrona County where they're a full-time virtual student, we'll say in Niobrara, then they're on the books as a Niobrara student. And if they were to take any local classes at Natrona, that would be by MOU, and it would be a payment from Niobrara to Natrona based on the MOU. And we don't record that MOU. We don't have any insight into that MOU. That's just a magical thing that happens out there that we explicitly allow for, but we don't track. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, you are correct.
So, we already passed that motion.
We did. We're good.
And I think we're done with discussion unless the committee has anything else. We're going to take a 10-minute break and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. So good work.
Birds? I love birds.
My toughest classes.
Yeah. There's so many of them.
They're all good. Those guys are like gray birds. And all. We can go through, but a little colored help.
They're better.
Some of these were completely gray too. So you're going
My distress is like, because I know they put them, now they put them in a floor, in a basement.
some of the ones we were using went back there stuck in the refrigeration.
Yeah. Not a good idea. And the cat in with a cowboy.
So you
I don't know, it depends on how they do it, but the question of what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you for the break, committee, and let's get back underway. We've got a ways to go before lunch. Infrastructure requirements, 27 LSO 147 K-12 school facilities planning and infrastructure study. Ms. Heitrick, welcome back. Thank you. If you would be kind enough to present this one to us and tell us what this bill does.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, again, Tanya Heitrick with the Legislative Service Office. You'll recall at your last meeting, there was significant discussion about efforts in Utah to sort of streamline infrastructure with towns, cities, governments, utility providers, stakeholders. And Utah had taken some action at that time to incorporate only a portion of that into their statutes. And so your legislative staff met with the state construction department relatively extensively about all of the meeting topics, but significant discussion on this particular issue. And there was some concern about embedding that Utah statute within Wyoming law without consideration of the stakeholders. And it's also sort of a broader issue than just what's contained in the Utah legislation. And had some conversations with Mr. Chairman, and he directed that the bill draft be a study of this particular issue. And so with that, I will walk the bill. Section 1 on the bottom of page 1 is where the substance begins of the study components. And sort of moving on to pages 2 and on to 3, you'll note there are several items that are required to be discussed, including planning and siting of those public school facilities, including local land use regulation, projected population growth, zoning, subdivision plating, permitting, and development review and approval processes. And then moving on to page 2, lines 15 through 18, this is where you'll see study of infrastructure requirements, public improvements, impact fees, development requirements, extractions, cost allocations, reimbursement agreements, cost sharing agreements, and other financial mechanisms to recoup some of those costs that the state is expending for really some community development efforts as well. On to page 2, line 20, and page 3, line 2. This is where the State Construction Department, along with the School Facilities Commission, will discuss coordination between those groups that I mentioned earlier. And then also any sort of planning committee, advisory committees, or intergovernment agreements or other coordination processes utilized. And I should have noted this at the outset, but it's not just studying these in the context of Wyoming law. This study requires comparison to other states like the Utah legislation to pull from their experiences and efficiencies that they may have gained through some sort of similar effort. Page 3, lines 4 through 10, again, a component of this study is to identify existing and potential exemptions from state or local land use permitting, infrastructure development, and finance requirements that may be applicable to K-12 school facilities that perhaps could be, they could be exempted from, that could reduce costs, streamline project delivery, or otherwise improve the efficiency of school facility development. Page 3, subsection B, and on to page 4 through line 6. These are the stakeholders that we mentioned earlier that would be consulted in performing this study. And there is sort of a catch-all at the end, which is other stakeholders as determined appropriate by the commission. And this study is commanded to the commission. They're the entity that oversees K-12 school construction and makes the policy decisions, but is certainly with the assistance of the state construction department. And then moving on to subsection C on page 4, lines 8 through 16. Page 4, line 8 through page 5, line 4. This is subsection D and C, and it requires a report by the commission addressing those items that I discussed in subsection A, along with a physical analysis for those recommended options and identifying any proposed statutory changes. Certainly your LSO staff would work with them on that last piece. But they know those statutes sometimes better than we do. And then that report is due October 1st of 2027 to this committee. And I would note, in conversations with the State Construction Department this morning, they identified a couple of items that they would like to be amended for your consideration. The first is this October 1st, 2027 date. They believe that they need an additional year. So if that could be pushed out to 2028, that would be their preference. And then the second amendment is coming up as well. In section 2, there's an appropriation of $150,000 for purposes of conducting the study. It, as the staff comment notes, it was simply a placeholder. We didn't know how much this might cost. And in conversations with the director this morning, he requested $300,000 to complete this work. And then finally, on page 6, lines 5 through 8, this bill is effective immediately so that they can get started on this work when the session ends. With that, members of the committee and Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the special districts, I'm curious if you can walk me through that, because think about like weed and pest. You know, I know it seems like BOCES is a special district in some areas, right? So is there different language we might want to consider other than special districts, or should we remove it? I'd just be curious the thought process on that.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, we could certainly narrow that. I think that question is probably best posed to the State Construction Department. They know the entities that are involved. You know, I don't have a response as to how to amend it. Sitting here right now, you could remove it if you didn't think it was applicable.
There is a bunch of special districts out there. So
100.
for sure. Anything else for Ms. Heitrick on the bill committee? Okay, thank you, Tanya. Really appreciate it. Let's see what the construction department thinks about this bill. Hello, Director. You know, just as to help the committee remember what kind of got us started in this direction, you might remember that the staff in front of you and me and some others met with the state of Utah. They came over to find out more about how we do things, and we found out some things about how they do things. And this is one area that we thought the state of Utah was a little bit out ahead of us in a good way. They have found a way to work with their municipalities and their counties and their special districts in a little bit. We operate a little bit more in a silo system, it seems like to me, Director. But anyway, that's the background, and that's why we have this bill in front of us today. The initial thought was, let's just adopt what Utah's doing. Well, that's a bigger lift than I think we realized. And so I think we better walk before we run. And this bill is the walk. So go ahead, Director. Hope that helps to set the scene a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, certainly does. The bill, again, I think an interim study so that it can come before this committee. Certainly don't want to blindside cities, counties, other folks in some of their revenue generation without having a discussion with them. So I think it really provides the opportunity that we start working with those communities proactively rather than reactively. That's what we've seen in a lot of cases. We'll fund a project, we'll go out and start the project, and all of a sudden we'll get a $100,000 ask or a $300,000 ask or $1 million ask after we've gone out and got the money for the project. And it really, frankly, it varies around the state. And I think those communities, those larger communities that have planning staffs and things is where we're seeing that. If you're in a Sundance or whatever, they're welcoming us to the community. They want a project. They want to see the improvement. What we see in the larger communities is, well, can we get some trees? Can we get some more sidewalk? Can we get some bike path extensions, things like that? Roadway improvements when we come in. And so for us to try and calculate these costs, and Mr. Chairman, I think this committee's very familiar with this because I know you've asked us a number of times over the years, why does it cost so much to build a school in Wyoming, and how does that compare to other states? And that's some of those things that, while it seems small, can certainly add up pretty quickly. And we're seeing that more recently on a couple of our projects. So I like the way the bill was put together. I had the same question that was asked on special districts. I was kind of thinking, we really don't run into much with special districts other than maybe irrigation canals, things like that, where they maybe get water, particularly for football fields or their landscaping, things like that. So that could be good, although we
Maybe a
haven't
fire
run into
district,
any
huh?
problems.
Maybe a fire district, I was thinking.
Have
Have you ever run into?
Not that I'm aware of, not as far as, obviously a fire district wants to know what's coming in.
Yeah.
And, what we need for fire hydrants, and, or if it's a more rural situation. I live out northeast of town, and there's some at Fox Run, and within that subdivision, there's 2 big tanks that the fire department put in to hold water so that when the pumpers get there, if they're starting to run short, then they can draw water without having to come all the way back into town. We've run into fire code issues. So
Yeah, like at Farson. You remember we ran into water
Exactly.
problems up there,
at
right?
Farson, at Munger Mountain, with a well. So YDOT's next door neighbor, when we had built the YDOT facility a decade before that, same concern came up. And so from a fire perspective, YDOT had already put in the well and the tanks to meet those requirements. So there was an MOU put together with Munger Mountain at Teton 1 to be able to use that facility rather than duplicate it up, simply because there was only a fence between the 2 properties. So things like that can come up in water situations. Again, the other things I really haven't run into too much. In the bill itself, again, was mentioned the August date. I think when you look at going through and looking at states that we'd hire a consultant to go through, and there's an awful lot of information that needs to be gathered. And then how do you put that together is my concern, and get something timely back to the committee. And it was mentioned, change that date to 28. I'd be okay with an August 1st of 28, because that would mean we would be able to bring that to your August meeting and your October meeting. So we'd have a couple of meetings to vet. And of course, your committee could also, ask is, how are you proceeding on this? Maybe even in your earlier first year meeting, in May or something, might be able to be out there in 28. So give you guys a lot of bites at the apple to kind of hear about this also as we're moving through this, and get some feedback from you all, as well as members of the public as we move forward, so we're not missing or forgetting something. Cost wise, I'll be quite honest, it's a wag as far as the money, but we'll figure it out and kind of go from there. So, but other than that, Mr. Chairman, I'm good with the study, and I think it is something needs to be done. As you mentioned, from what we saw from Utah, they were running into the same situation, getting a lot of surcharges on their projects, and felt they had to rein that in.
Yeah. Anything for the director or the staff? Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Director McComey. I guess a couple of things. I would agree. I wouldn't want to see it pushed out to October of 28 to have this committee be able to have plenty of time to go through the information coming back, and perhaps maybe a preliminary report by May, or something along those lines. I'd love to see the whole study by the first part of May, but I guess we can figure out what that timeline looks like. The second thing would be, is there a way to get a finer tuned number by the time session rolls around, so that it's a little more defensible than we're saying it's a wag?
Mr. Chairman, I think there is. There's a few consultants that we could reach out to. I'm thinking myself, I would prefer to see an in-state consultant for this one simply because they know Wyoming. They know a lot of our architectural firms, for example, work throughout the state. So they have contacts with cities, counties, things like that, where an out-of-state consultant can certainly do it, but may not have that touch with Wyoming. And so we could reach out and see what they think that may look like based on the information that's being requested. And I like the idea, Mr. Chairman, of maybe a preliminary report back in your May meeting.
Yeah.
I think we can, that given the timeline where the money's available immediately, in my conversation with your LSO staff, just once we get the money to set up the RFP, go out and select, get through that, start the contract. That's a 3-month process right there. We'd be losing if this was a 27 date. Wouldn't leave only leave a few months to get all this done. And you can see by the bill, there's an awful lot of.
No, Director, I think the representative makes a couple of really good suggestions, and I don't know that we need to put that in the bill.
Okay.
If we use the August 1st date, maybe it could just be understood that by May, let's get some preliminary looks at what we think we're going to have in August. And then we go into that August meeting and follow it up with an October meeting. This select committee can always request another day if it's needed, but I would think that would work. Don't you? I don't think we need to spell out, the department has to give a preliminary report by May 1st. We could do that, but do we need to hold your feet to the fire on that?
Your LSO staff can certainly do that. They do that all the time. So I'm sure they're taking notes.
All right. Anything more for the director? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Representative, go ahead.
One other thought too, we've talked about some of these instances where we've run into issues. Would it be beneficial to include case studies into the deliverables here? Issues where instances where we've got known issues, I guess.
I think so. I kind of took the language in the bill to have some of that when it talks about, providing background materials on that. And I think we could. Yeah.
I think, Director, the idea is to work really well with our counties, our municipalities, our towns. That's the idea. Yeah, I like it. Thank you. Appreciate your thoughts. And if we have any further questions, we'll holler at you. Let's go to other comment on this bill. We're considering K-12 school facilities planning and infrastructure study. That's LSO 147. So let's go to any public comment on this. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Nathan Nicholas on behalf of the Wyoming Association of Municipalities.
Great to see you, Nate.
We appreciate the committee bringing this bill and considering it. We think the further coordination between school facilities and municipalities is always a good thing. And we're in support. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions for our municipalities? Nate, thanks. It's always good to see you.
You as well.
Appreciate you. Further public comment. Good morning.
Director of Support Operations. I just want to say that I'm in support of this bill. We do run into a lot of this that is unforeseen costs when we get into the part of a new school. And I would say 10 years ago, I think Laramie County one did a little better job of this, maybe it depends on who the leaders of the community are at the time and what kind of meetings we have. But I think this can be established pretty easily with our long-range facility plans. Obviously, the state has currently done most cost-effective remedies across the state, as well as our facility condition assessments. So I think we can project out what's coming fairly accurately. And some things that we run into, especially in a district such as this, are state, county, and city requirements of right-of-ways, roadways, retention, detention ponds, stormwater runoff, traffic signals, things like that, that are outside of the budgets that are usually allocated during that same process. So I think projecting out that those are coming and working a little closer with them would help curb some of those costs.
Andy, appreciate that. I like the conversation that will ensue on this one. You know, where we get with it, it's hard to tell, but I think it's good to look into. So thank you. Anything for Laramie One? Appreciate it, Andy. Thank you. Anything further? Any further public comment on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, not public comment, but I do have an answer in response to Representative Provenza's question about special districts, if
Wonderful.
you'd like that.
Thank you. Ms.
So
Heitrick,
it's
if you-
things such as water and sewer districts, fire protection districts, improvement and service districts, joint power boards, perhaps irrigation districts, drainage districts, watershed improvement districts, conservation districts, flood control districts, sanitary and improvement districts. And I think the point is, this isn't just to improve efficiency, but it's also to ensure that the siting of the school is the best location. And so those may not be applicable in every instance, but certainly could be impacted. So I don't know if you want to single that list out or perhaps just leave it to the discretion of the commission to identify those that are relevant to the discussion, perhaps.
Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the way the language is written, I'm correct in that they just have discretion. They can choose who they need to pick. They don't need to necessarily find someone from each special district to consult with.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Provenza, I think that's an accurate reading. And if you wanted to, ensure that that specific category was limited to those that they felt like were relevant to the discussion, we could certainly add, as identified by the commission or something to that effect to that particular group.
Anything else? Anything else, committee? Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate that. I'm going to close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on LSO 147? Moved by Representative Geringer and a second by Senator Love. Discussion. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd move the two proposed amendments by school facilities.
Okay.
I'll move them as one, but they're divisible.
Okay, that takes us to page 5, committee, and I think Senator Rothfuss is pointing to that October 1st date, which would change, I believe, to August 1st of 28.
Yep.
And 300,000 instead of 150 on line 7.
Correct.
Okay, seconded by Representative Provenza. Discussion on that motion. Any discussion? Senator Love, thoughts? There was a crease in your forehead, so. Okay, all right. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion has carried. August 1st and 300,000. Staff, did we get that? We okay? Anything further on the bill? Representative Provenza.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was asking myself, do we really need a study to do this? And I will say, I think that this potentially could get complicated. And we have a fairly new legislature coming in, I think, with a lot of new folks that don't necessarily know the complications of all of this. And I think it would be helpful for us to do our due diligence to set up the committee in the next interim for success in ensuring that whatever bill that they bring forth, if we're going to require this of our facilities and all of the people involved, I think we want a good bill. And I think this helps set that up, given that we potentially have a new body, which is just something that happens every 2 years in the House. I guess in the Senate as well, but that was my thought process was, do we need a bill? Do we need a study? But I do think this could get complicated real quick. And we are at the end of the day, just a hillbilly legislature. So it might be helpful to get some formal read from our friends that know what they're doing.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think this is a pretty big lift. It's a pretty substantial set of statutes in a state next to us. You know, they ran into it. You can imagine the Front Range, by the way, of Utah and what they've run into down there. Just an explosion of population and all these things going on and trying to find a spot to put a school and all sorts of folks having to weigh in and school districts being asked to put a little extra water line in and this and that. And I think Utah got out ahead of that. So I'm looking at our commissioners, and this is a little bit of a lift for the commission, Director. And I didn't ask you when you were up here, but that's quite a bit. Are we okay there? We're asking quite a bit of our commission, and I appreciate that. Are we okay to put a couple of extra meetings in there?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I didn't ask them directly, but they are aware of the discussions and what we've had at the last meeting. So, but it gives me a little bit of a plug right now. I forgot to say this a little bit earlier. We've got 4 members of the current commission that are scheduled to go off. And with a little bit of
They don't realize that that's a lifetime appointment?
Yeah, well, they do now, Mr. Chairman, because with a little bit of arm twisting from the chairman, they've all agreed to sign back on. So I gave their names to the governor's office to see them come back on because they are very seasoned. They've been around. They do great work. I've worked with a lot of commissions over the years, and they just are really outstanding, good folks to work with. So with that, we'll get her done.
Boy, that's great news. Thank you, Director. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming up on that.
Thank you.
Anything else, committee? Let's take roll call on 147, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is a motion to sponsor 27 LSO 147 K-12 School Facilities Planning and Infrastructure Study as amended. Senator Dockstader. Senator Love.
Aye.
Senator McEwen.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Bratton.
Aye.
Representative Geringer.
Aye.
Representative Heft. Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Vice Chair Angelos.
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
That is 10 ayes.
Okay, that bill has passed the committee and we'll move on to the session for consideration. We are ahead of schedule, first time ever with this chairman. We come to our 1 o'clock topic, but I think, Director, if you guys are comfortable, I don't think we're missing anybody that would not be able to chime in. So if you'd like to carry on, let's go ahead and take up state construction follow-up information. I believe that's some items that came up in May, and you'd like to follow up with us on those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, Mr. Rexis always watches your back trail, but he has a little bit more trouble today watching your back trail. So
He does.
sorry you're dealing with that.
He's trying to become the bionic man.
Yeah.
So he's
Yeah.
got a little more metal in his neck
There you
right
go.
now than he did it.
Lifting way too many
So,
pieces of sheetrock or something right above your head.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I don't know if I would attribute this to the 25 years of physical labor or the last 15 working for the department.
I think it's the latter probably. So. Director, take it away. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to just turn this right over to Administrator Carlson, and she's got all the notes written down. She's got a lot more yellow marks highlighted on the paragraphs than I do. So with that, Mr. Chairman.
Administrator Carlson, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the last meeting, we discussed this concept of minor capital construction type of projects where a district wants to come in and do minor renovations to make adjustments for educational functionality in their building. And so what was the frequency of those types of projects? So we did a little research. We kind of have limited knowledge into this because in general, major maintenance doesn't qualify. So the districts take these projects on their own very frequently. So we did some outreach, and then we did take a look into our major maintenance project requests. Because in general, major maintenance isn't applicable. But if a district is doing a large project that might include some remodel and some reconfiguration, if it comes in as a major maintenance request, we will meet with them and say, let's go through the scope of this project. And where could major maintenance be used and where can it not be used? And so a lot of work when they get in there, maybe they need to replace the carpet. That would be major maintenance eligible, or upgrade the lighting. That would be major maintenance eligible. Putting in new walls, removing walls, some of those things generally are not. They may be. If you get in and you've got to do all the electrical in that wall, you got to rip it all apart anyway. Then, replace it. If you move it a little bit, it's not going to matter. So it takes some judgment. We try to work with the districts closely. Generally, our major maintenance or component jobs are driven categorically, like we're getting ready to do an HVAC job, or we're getting ready to do a roof, more so than a larger scope of work. And when you get into these types of projects, it more is a scope of work where some components fit in there. In talking with the districts, what they'll generally do is they try to leverage the state funds, and they'll use a blended funding model. In general, what we got was typically like 70% major maintenance or state funds, might be a component project that they'll come in and supplement with their own funds. Or it might be a major maintenance project where they will come in and supplement with their own funds. They may use special education funds. They may use special grant funds that they get to get in there and do some of those changes. The things that we do look for, we want to make sure that they aren't changing the intent and the use of a building, and they aren't affecting the capacity of that building. We don't want them to go in and start reducing the capacity by some of those changes. I would note that with the recent legislation that passed with recalibration, we have heard from a lot of districts where they kind of put the moratorium or the ban on using some of those special district reserves for facilities. That will limit our districts to doing some of these types of projects because they can no longer use those special reserve funds. The general types of projects that we see occurring out there, CTE is a very common one. CTE was big and it kind of went away, and now CTE is certainly really growing again and trying to get CTE worked back into these buildings. So we're seeing a lot of renovation go on in that realm. We see districts that are trying to, ideally, they would like to put an addition on. It increases excess square footage if they do that. And of course, we try to limit that, and a lot of our funding mechanisms limit that. So we will see them go into certain spaces and remodel those to make those CTE reconfiguration changes. We're seeing a lot of this happen in the special education realm. Certainly our special education numbers are on the rise. And they need those students have different needs. And sometimes the space needs to be different, or they stay with the classroom for certain portions, but then they move off for group setting where they do some of their work separately. So we see quite a bit of reconfiguration of instructional spaces happening there. One of the other real common comments that we got from talking with the districts, a lot of times it can be driven more by a change in leadership, right? In the way that they want to deliver that particular programming can differ from leadership to leadership on how they want to make that successful for their school. remodeling of administrative and classroom spaces, especially with the safety and security. And if we look at some of those districts that don't have vestibules yet, we'll be talking about later, a lot of the issue occurs in the older buildings. So before we really got looking hard at safety and security in pre-Campbell buildings, they put the office in the middle of the building. And so in order to try to get your administration to the front entry of the building, you have to do some reconfiguration to, say, classrooms to be adaptable for the office and administration. And then you change those other spaces into classrooms. So obviously that strategic relocation of the central admin benefits those districts. It optimizes access control, heightens administrative oversight, and reinforces building safety protocols. So there's a lot of advantages to moving that space. And then the other one, and I kind of touched on this above, is multiple component needs. So like while we might give funding for a component level project, it's usually a single system. So we might come in and say, we're going to fund you to do a new HVAC system. But in conjunction with that project, maybe they need to change out their windows. Now, if they're just replacing those, they can use their major maintenance to do that. Maybe they want to increase their insulation envelope, some of those types of changes. So while we tend to fund one thing with that component project, they might want to pull in other components and just leverage again that work to get better economy of scale. Certainly some of the districts brought up that they really do need a mechanism of some sort to help them make these kinds of changes, because we know educational programming, the model is changing all the time in the way we teach kids. I certainly didn't carry a computer with me when I went to school many years ago, but almost every student has one now. So things are changing fast. So we were asked to kind of look, well, what might be the possible mechanisms to do this? The first one we put in there, you kind of always look at do nothing. The districts are making some of these things work. With the change in the recent legislation, that is going to tie their hands a little more, that they won't have as good of an ability to make these kind of changes. And in some cases, you may have districts that they simply don't have the district funds available to do these kind of changes in their schools. We looked at, allowing major maintenance. We put 10%. This certainly could be set at any percentage. The downside to that is the legislature's worked really, really hard, and this committee, to get that major maintenance funding level up where we believe it needs to be to maintain these facilities for the long run. Try to get 75 years out of these facilities. Anytime you start peeling money away from that major maintenance funding to another program, you then damage, your ability and hamper your ability to maintain those facilities to get that life expectancy that we want to get from our facilities. And then the third item we put here was a minor capital project funding program for small renovation type of projects. I think this could be done in a number of ways, but we just talked about a targeted funding program that would enable school districts to request capital funds for minor renovation, remodeling, or reconfiguration projects that improve the facility's functionality. Like the existing component project program, this initiative would grant districts greater flexibility to reconfigure their spaces as they need to. To ensure the fiscal accountability, allowable modifications should preserve existing facility capacity without creating additions that result in excess square footage. And then just another comment, as we look, if we're going to start bringing in another program that we as an agency have to manage, it will stress our resources. We thank you for getting us a couple positions this past year. That was big for us. But every time we add another program, it strains our pretty limited staff again. So that's what I had put together there for you. I did just put in the major maintenance definitions so that you had those to look at and understand why sometimes we will say no to some of these types of projects that come in that are really more of a remodel reconfiguration. And with that, I take any questions.
Any questions, committee? Any questions? Representative Garringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Shelley, for doing this. So do other, I'm trying to equate this to any other programs that we have with the state. Do in any of the state buildings, do we have minor maintenance included for other state buildings in any case? Do you know?
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting that you said that because we just had the discussion on the state side to some degree of this very topic. It's generally included within the agency's budget. And so they would come to the legislature with an overall budget. We don't have any smaller programs that work through the state construction department, the CM side of the house, and going to the commission, the State Building Commission. There isn't anything where they come in and say, hey, I need to move a wall or whatever. They're generally a larger remodel. We're requesting money right now for the Hathaway building to do the third or the basement through the third floor. They've already redone the fourth floor and the fifth floor, and they did simply based on efficiencies from when that building was put together, built many, many years ago, decades ago. They are moving some walls, but we're doing it as part of a larger project rather than individual wall moving or things like that. And so I think, I guess if I was leaning one way or the other, if we were going to go with option 2, the major maintenance, I'd keep a smaller dollar amount rather than typically we've used the 10%. As Ms. Carlson mentioned, it might be 2% or 3%, and something could be looked at there to say, how much would that give per district? Because that would be a lot of money in some of your larger districts where if they're just wanting to move a wall occasionally here or there, would certainly take care of that. I was thinking the other one would be a pretty limited program, and it could probably be spelled out legislatively with constraints that they would come and request to the commission to have some funding. And I don't know if that would be an annual ask or if there'd be a pot of money put aside for that could be drawn upon by the commission, kind of like the emergency account or something like that, if they needed to move a couple of walls. Again, if you ran into a code violation, and we just had this come up, where they needed to add something for ADA, that falls under major maintenance. So that type of issue is there. It's really, I think, do we want to, and where we first really ran into that was up in the Torrington area, where we had a school building and they had these really large classrooms. I mean, they were like 1,500, 2,000 square foot classrooms in a real old school. And they were just wanting to put some walls in so they could have better teaching arrangement, because typically that square footage would generate an 850 square foot room in what we would design today. So they were really oversized rooms, but you start running into that capacity problem issue. In this case, they would increase capacity, not decrease it. But you start running into those issues. And it wasn't a lot of dollars. We just literally had no mechanism to take care of that. And so I think, again, maybe kind of a hardship program, whatever you'd call it, through the commission, where they'd come to the department and we could sit down and work, might be another option in that case.
So, Director, in your mind, is there room for, or are we desiring in any way to modify major maintenance statutes that would help on this front? I think one of the drivers for me to have a discussion about this was just a couple of times that I've run into situations where superintendents or principals have said, yeah, we tried to move that wall, but we just couldn't get her done, and if we could ever moved it, we'd have, it would have been sunshine and roses. Instead, we're in the dark. So I would go away from there thinking, why do we have red tape in the way? So do we have red tape in the way? Are we able to respond pretty much to most of these kinds of requests from your viewpoint?
Mr. Chairman, we have red tape in the way in that our hands are tied based on statute.
Okay.
And so to try and do some of those, and these don't come up a lot. I mean, it isn't like we're getting monthly
Right.
requests to do this. So it doesn't come up a lot, and just exactly how the legislature would like to give some leeway one way or the other. Again, if you wanted to put it in, okay, you have existing funds, you, the district, need to weigh your priorities. Do you want to move a wall versus fix carpet with major maintenance money? I would keep that percentage certainly less than that standard. It's always been 10%. I don't know how that number was arrived at for various programs over the years. Enhancements, security, things like that was always a 10% for the districts. And some of them haven't even used those funds. Some have used those funds. And again, it's for the districts to weigh which way they want to head on that. But like Ms. Carlson said, I have concerns over the major maintenance versus maybe some other nomenclature that would be a
So given that,
way to relieve that.
Director, what about a rule change that would allow for what you suggested, which is, one situation that I ran into was a great big gymnasium structure that in years gone by, they had this idea that a dark paint was the way to go. And it was darker than the inside of a Stetson hat when you walk in that gym. And all the request was we just need the money to get this thing painted, which seemed really reasonable to me. Through rule, couldn't you allow for a special consideration by the commission for the use of X, Y, or Z monies? Does that make sense? I mean, maybe something in rule might allow your commission to take up a special ask like that. Would that work?
I think there could be something that would allow an exception for the commission to grant that, no different than what they do for emergency funding, things like that, where we look at what do they have available for major maintenance right now before the commission grants that. But I'm not sure. Generally, rules follow statute. And so would there need to be a statute change that allows that or not? I don't know, for the use of major maintenance money. Your LSO staff could
Just
probably weigh in on
personally,
that
it
for us.
doesn't feel like it necessarily means needs the sledgehammer. It could just need the pen on a rule change. But Senator Rothfuss, what do you think on that side of it?
Mr. Chairman, it's the language that we have under the definition of effectively major maintenance. And it's included in the memo. So it's at the bottom of their page 2 of 3.
Yeah.
And, midway through that definition, it says that is required to continue the use of the property at its designed capacity or its designed intended use. So it's not major maintenance if you're changing what's being done. And that's where they haven't been able to, through rule, come up with that logical solution of, if you add a room, add one more wall to this room and now you've got 2 classrooms and you solve your problem. Well, that's not the designed intended use. The designed intended use was for it to be a gym or whatever. And if you turn it into classrooms, you're doing something which is explicitly outside of major maintenance. So I think if we want to accomplish this objective, we've got to provide a little language there that allows for an exception to that designed intended use under certain circumstances, which we could certainly do. And maybe it would go to the commission. It would be a request or something. I think there's a mechanism, but I think that's the challenge right now. And Mr. Chairman, this is tricky, and we just made it trickier, as this memo points out, because we simultaneously don't want major maintenance to be used for something that it's not intended for, and this definition is what it's intended for. And as we've talked about earlier, we chronically underfund major maintenance. So the idea that we're going to use it for something else is that means we pay more money in the future for the upkeep of the building. So that's a bad investment. We also don't want school districts to use their general funds for any construction projects. because it's supposed to be used for what we set forth in the school foundation program. And as a matter of fact, we just took one step further in recalibration and made it even more explicit. So now there's no wiggle room for a district to use general funds for anything along these lines. So we have effectively eliminated the possibility of any solution for a simple problem like we have. And, you know, I brought up at the last meeting, and I'll bring it up again because it's certainly on my mind, for our Snowy Range Academy has this large room that they've taken. We own it. This school district owns it, but they needed to expand. So we have this colossal room that doesn't have any walls in it. There is no vehicle to fund the $1.5 million project or whatever it ends up being, to put walls in so that space can be useful. So they just have a giant room, which is larger than this room. And they just go out into it and they look at it and think, wouldn't it be nice if we could use this for school? But you can't do it with the general fund. You can't do it with major maintenance. There's no pool of funding that they could use for it. So we've over-constrained the system. That's not to say I know exactly what the solution is. Maybe it is a combination of suggestions 2 and 3 in my mind, where 2 is allows some portion of major maintenance to be used. And then 3 is the minor capital projects funding program, so that we have funds available that requests can be made to the commission for. I don't know, it's a challenge, but what we have right now certainly doesn't work. And the other thing, just as an aside, they couldn't even do it when they were already committing to major maintenance, a major maintenance project for a room where they're doing what you said. Maybe they're already reconstructing it for some reason. They have to reconstruct it back to exactly as it is right now. They can't change its intended purpose, even if they are committing all of the funds to rebuild it. They would have to rebuild it the same, and that's where it makes absolutely no sense. So if they're going to spend $1 million on a portion of the building through major maintenance, they wouldn't be allowed to change it while they're spending that $1 million, even if it was more educationally suitable at the end. They have to go with the programming that was originally intended. So we need to fix this, but it's not an easy one because we don't want them to be diminishing the value of those major maintenance funds.
Well, on that bright note, yeah. So the answer is no to my question. A rule change isn't going to get us there. I'm inclined, to hear from our public.
Yeah.
And we can ruminate on what we've learned so far on this follow-up, and really appreciate it, Ms. Carlson. Thank you for catching us up on where we are. Something that seems kind of simple, we've made more complicated by statute. So thank you. Let's go to public comment on this topic. I would be interested in hearing from folks on this one. Good morning. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is certainly
just
topic that came up
for the record.
Kirk Schmidt. I live in Lander. In the third paragraph where it says the ban on applying district funds to facility, okay, that came up for a lot of different reasons, and it kind of made my hair stand on end forever and a day, because when you look at the discussions about limiting cash reserves for school districts, it flies in the face of good budgetary management. Every government entity strives to have a surplus at the end of the year. There's a lot of different ways to end up with that. Just because a school district has a surplus doesn't mean they're underfunding education. I'm going to use last winter as an example. In Lander, at Christmas, it was 60 degrees. If you take all the utilities that were budgeted for this year in all the school districts, you're going to have a substantial underspending of those utilities. Utilities are in the funding model. Doesn't mean you didn't spend it on education. It just means you have a surplus at the end of the year. And what that legislation did, it told the locally elected school board that they can't use taxpayers' dollars to work on a taxpayer-funded facility. That's what that statute did. When we talk about surplus, they're in the government entity that, okay, after doing 39 years, I kind of know what I'm talking about. Everybody understands you're not going to spend one-time money on an ongoing expense. You're not going to put it into salaries or benefits, things that are reoccurring. But you do have an opportunity to take one-time money and paint the gym you're talking about, or to move a wall that doesn't fit in the rules of the school facility department. And that's fair. It's interesting that you have a discussion about changing the rules for major maintenance to use taxpayers' money to do that. But then on the same token, the legislature has said, oh, by the way, you can't use those same taxpayer dollars out of a surplus that you have at your disposal to take care of those facilities. I don't understand the difference, Mr. Chairman, but it's created a problem over time. And it's always bothered me my entire career. I always thought, why are you restricting a school district, a board of trustees from striving to have as much cash reserve as they could have? Okay, I can guarantee you that if it gets too high, the locally elected taxpayers are going to solve that problem. It's not going to be a legislative issue. It's going to be a local school board. And I've never run into a school board that was not willing to put the funds back into the system, one way or another, whether it's using it to buy a bus, whether it's using it to do something that's outside of the norm. They're going to spend it wisely. They aren't buying the school board members' golf clubs. It doesn't happen. They're spending it. But the way the legislation happened last year, it's well put in this report. You just handcuffed that school board again from taking care of taxpayer facilities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schmidt, thank you. Any questions? Appreciate you coming forward. Further comment? Welcome.
There we go. Mary Jo Lewis, Coordinator of Business Services for Park Number 1 up in Powell. And I appreciated Senator Rothfuss's comments on not being able to move the wall, but I have an example on almost every one of your CTE, the special education, the remodeling of the administrative spaces. And I've been doing this for my 36th year. Part of it was in a small school district in Basin for 10 years, and then I've been in Powell for the remainder of that time. So have seen, what happens. We talked about, Director McComey talked about possibly a 3%. Well, even in Park Number 1, I generate about a little bit over $2 million in major maintenance dollars. Well, if you drop that to even 3%, okay, you guys, that's $60,000. That takes care of some things, but I'm going to use the CTE renovation as a potential, just an example of that. So for instance, when Powell High School was built back in 2005, that our CTE program for culinary arts was just cooking stations. We have 6 different cooking stations in a room, other space, that type of thing. So culinary arts, obviously CTE has expanded. Cooking stations are really not the norm anymore. It's actually commercial kitchen applications. So we explored 4 years ago to actually change one of those stations to a commercial kitchen area with a commercial kitchen stove. Once you do that, that precipitates that now you have to have a hood system over the top of that, has to be vented either through a wall or through the ceiling. Okay. It forces the entire thing about now we can't use major maintenance dollars. We have no ability to actually upgrade a program. And CTE has become a big, a big word out there that everybody is moving towards. They want funding for it. We want to do this. We have a very successful CTE program, but our kids are handcuffed by the fact that when they go to competitions for a National School Skills USA, they're cooking on things that aren't commercial kitchen. They don't have that experience. So they're doing it using, a basic, what we have in households as far as stoves, ovens, that type of thing. But anyway, when we explored that, the cost of doing that was over $200,000 because all of a sudden, you're having to add these other components into that and going through a structure. Again, not allowed in major maintenance. There's no other source of funding to be able to do that. Okay, so it doesn't meet that definition when you go into major maintenance. I'm going to hit the special education piece. Southside Elementary School in our district is the elementary school that houses our life skills program. We have, I'm sure you're all aware of what's actually happening in the special education community, but we're having a lot of elementary level kids coming in, medically fragile, all that. We looked at using ESSER dollars because it was allowable at that time to go ahead, add a couple of classrooms on to accommodate that program. We have the need in our district. When the bid came in, it was so high, we had to just go, oh, sorry, can't do that. Again, because we can't use major maintenance dollars to add square footage. There is no minor capital construction program anymore. There used to be. So back, in Senator Land and, Senator Rothfuss, you're familiar with it. We used to have minor capital construction where there was those funds available to do those. Okay, my 2 classrooms are never going to get to a level of being capital construction funded. Okay, you're not replacing a school. Those schools were built in 2010 and 2011. Well, they're never in their lifetime going to come back. While I'm here, and not for hopefully considerable years down the road, are they going to come back to a level of they need to be replaced? We need to add 2 classrooms. But again, the funding source is not there to actually accomplish taking care of special ed kids in that area. We don't have any space in the other schools. That's where they go for life skills. And if you've ever been in a life skills classroom, you can't take a regular elementary classroom, even if you have reduced kids. You can't take that and make that your life skills classroom. It doesn't work. It's completely different. It's a different program. The remodeling of the administrative and classroom spaces, I only do this one because, again, you're not allowed to add square footage. In our admin building, our vestibule, and that is a word I can't say very well. I want to call it vegetable. So if it comes out vegetable, just go with me. Okay. We need to expand square footage by about 10 feet because basically we have enough room for it to barely be ADA accessible. All right. So if you want line of sight doing any of that, we have to expand it. Again, not allowed. Safety and security. It is the one building in our district that does not have any of what all our other schools have as far as a secure lockdown area where people can come in, we can cite them, we can do that to let people in. So right now, anybody can come in and out of our building. We're not trying to make it unwelcome for our people to come in and visit us. It's just that we don't have the same security because we cannot add square footage in that space. I just wanted to give you an example of, I could hit all 3 of those areas that happened in our district that we don't have the ability to use major maintenance funding. We've actually been able to access or will be able to access component level funding. Our school district does not have any 1s and 2s that need to be addressed. So we've properly utilized our major maintenance funding, but we can't take care of those items that we feel that you actually had 3 specific things on there using any dollars. I don't know that I kind of like that you being able to use 10% of your major maintenance dollars. But I don't know that it meets the scope of the needs sometimes in a district. And I understand, but we used to have a minor capital projects section. I still have the fund set up. Could I account for it? Absolutely. Would it require some additional work on behalf of the school facilities department? Absolutely. But they're already utilize, you have to go through all those types of steps anyway if you're going to do major maintenance types of projects. I'm not sure that it's that much more expensive. It is the funding source of that, though, that would become legislatively your issue. And I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Really appreciate it. You kind of answered my question there at the end, which was, what would you like to see us do to help fix this problem? It sounds like maybe bringing back a suggestion to our commission that they reestablish the small project funding model might be the way to go, huh?
Mr. Chairman, we worked through that. That was what we had to utilize. We had minor and major capital construction, and we utilized that from, the get-go up until the point where then it all became major cap. And I think what was that, about 2010 or something, where there was no more minor cap available. But I didn't think it was that cumbersome. It was, to me, no different, than putting in your project and doing it, with how we utilize major maintenance now. I'm not sure that that's any more expansive than doing that. All school districts are capable of tracking those funds separately. We're used to the audit procedures on that. There's not going to be anything different on that. So again, it would require funding of that, and obviously a study to see, kind of what types of projects are out there that had those types of requirements or that might fall into that area. But I would say it's much like component level funding that goes through a committee and through a process to determine who is eligible for that and have you met all your other needs and that type of thing. So.
Thank you. Any questions for the northwest corner of the state here? Thank you for being here, Ms. Lewis. Appreciate it. Any further testimony, any further public testimony on the issue in front of us? Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Thank you for those who came forward with good information there. Committee, I'm inclined, I sure would like to maybe see us take a swing at this. We've got such a solid commission. It seems to me like if we could create or recreate a system that allows that commission to do that job of vetting these projects. Some of the projects that were described to us this morning are completely reasonable. And probably projects that the select committee would approve if brought. So that's my initial thoughts. It feels like we've got a little piece of the thing broken here. Do we want to try to do anything about it? We've got another meeting if we wanted to try to draft something. What's the pleasure of the committee? Representative Bratton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, probably for you, is the small project funding model. When did that go away, and what were the reasons that went away? Do you have any idea?
Representative, Mr. Rexis, do you want to come forward and answer? I think about 2010 is what I'm thinking. That shows you how long I've been around because I was on the committee when they did it. Can you help? I'm sure there was good reasoning.
Mr. Chairman, I can kind of make an educated guess on that. I'm not super clear on the exact date, but I'd say it's probably around the 12 or 13 range, 2012. 2013 was when we more or less instituted the component level request program and kind of scaled away from that capital request program.
So we kind of traded one for the other, right?
Yeah. The one thought that came to my mind, and I don't necessarily want to get too deep into the weeds on this because there's a lot of work that needs to be done yet. But my particular area of concern in regards to a minor cap program like this is we're going to see a lot of different requests, and trying to determine exactly how we prioritize between those requests and what kind of a difference they're going to make in each respective district is going to be difficult because it's going to be completely apples to oranges. And aside from that, we're talking about more of an educational delivery aspect of this. And our department focuses and specializes on the construction and the remediation of buildings. So, you know, we need to bring in that expertise and be able to validate and verify and quantify how much of an improvement from an educational delivery these proposed changes would make. And in order to be able to truly take a look at them and prioritize them and see where we're getting the most bang for the buck as we move forward. And so, again, I don't mean to overcomplicate this, because we can work our way through that and we can find a way to do that if that's the committee's pleasure. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, Mr. Rexis, I thank you for that. And I think that was a good answer to the representative's question. Good cautions that you've thrown out there. I remember a lot of that came up, and so what, if anything, comes to your mind this morning during this discussion that would be a little bit of a fix, or maybe a complete fix, of districts being able to modify like we've talked about? Where would you like to see it come from? Because I know it's got to be frustrating to you to say, I'm sorry, we can't do this, right? So how would you fix it?
Mr. Chairman, that's a very difficult question to answer, but I think what it comes down to is we have to have some consideration for the exception to the rule, and not continually try to address the exception to the rule through our rules process or through statute. And I think what that boils down to, at some point in time, one of these committees or commissions or the department is going to need the discretion to say, this is something that makes good sense to move forward with, and make that determination and document the justification for that, and then just move forward. So I know that's kind of a vague and very general answer, but I think what it comes down to is essentially you have to trust the people that you put in place to oversee that and make sure that everything is done appropriately or for good reason, if it's outside of what the normal procedures and policies are, in order to get the most return on your investment.
John, that sounds an awful lot like common sense that you've thrown out there, but thank you for that. No, I appreciate it. Committee, questions of the director, suggestions on anything? Maybe we just can take this to lunch and think about it. We've got this afternoon too. Representative Geringer.
It just makes me wonder, thank you, Mr. Chairman, makes me wonder if we need to perhaps define statutorily a minor capital project or a small project, whatever we want to call it, that can then be incorporated into, if we do come up with the allowable, make it part of major maintenance funding, 10% allowable toward minor capital projects. Same thing if it's even a separate budget item for the commission, or even if we want to incorporate that somehow into an allowable use of reserves, or setting reserves aside for that sort of thing. And the trick would be then, how do we define that? Something that is non-recurring renovation, alteration, doesn't expand the gross square footage, can't be used for primarily cosmetic, something along those lines, that is separating it from major maintenance and giving us a place to tackle the issue. But then from there, I'm not sure exactly where we would incorporate that.
Senator Dockstader.
Follow up to that, Mr. Chairman, how did we define our small projects in the past? You mentioned percentage. Where was the cutoff? How did we do this back in 2010 or 12?
My recollection, Senator, is that it was pretty much, just the finance bar was more of it than a whole great big statute outlining exactly what a small project was. But that's a long time ago. And I've forgotten what I even had for breakfast. So I just think there were probably some guidelines there that I'm not remembering.
Do we, Mr. Chairman?
Representative Brad, did you? Mr. Wilmarth.
Mr. Chairman, Matt Wilmarth, also a couple things to maybe take into consideration as you break for lunch. Statewide, you established definitions in Title IX for all of these major maintenance, capital renewal, capital construction projects to be utilized for state, university, community college, and school district projects. That was kind of a standardized definition that is now referenced across your statute. So tweaking one of these just for school districts may be problematic in that instance where it may impact how the state looks at a project or the university or colleges. So that's just one consideration. I do think under the capital renewal definition, some of these projects probably fit within that definition. So we can certainly point that out and send it out to the committee for your review during lunch. With regards to when did the commission start or stop requesting these projects, the last minor capital construction appropriation occurred in the 2006 budget session, and the first component level projects occurred in the 2010 budget session. So there are 3 intervening sessions in which the commission did not request any component level or minor cap budget amounts. That doesn't necessarily mean that within the, and I don't have the details going back, but that doesn't mean that the commission didn't request this type of project underneath a capital construction request. We would have to go and look at the details of those budgets and the reports in which they requested that funding. But, you know, in terms of how you've structured your appropriations, that minor capital construction went away.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. And so as a reminder, Mr. Chairman, the Title IX rewrite, that wasn't our work. That was our friends on the Appropriations Committee rewriting all of state maintenance related statutes. And I think I voted no, so I won't necessarily take credit for that one. And it does cause us some complication though, because we want to comport with that. But on the capital renewal language, how does that currently look then in Title IX, and how could we potentially take advantage of that?
Mr. Chairman, Member Office, I'll read it. It is 9-2-3001, subsection B, paragraph 8. Capital renewal means capital construction infrastructure upgrades and replacement projects to systems external to a building or facility that are necessary for the continued functionality of a building or facility. Capital renewal includes projects that do not qualify as new construction and for which the costs exceed amounts typically appropriated or expended on major maintenance for a property such as water projects, sewer upgrades, or sewer projects, electrical projects, and other major infrastructure projects external to a building or facility that impact the life, health, and safety of occupants in a building or facility. This definition was kind of the component project, or what at least was targeting that component project. But I do think it likely fits within kind of a minor cap definition where, you know, it's continuing the functionality of that building. So if you need to add a security vestibule or a classroom or modify within that facility, I think there's some wiggle room within that definition, but it's certainly up for interpretation.
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up.
Follow up to Senator Rothfuss, and then we'll go to.
I heard external to the building like 2 times. Was that in an or clause or was that in a necessary clause?
Mr. Chairman, I'll reread that portion of the definition. Capital renewal includes projects that do not qualify as new construction and for which the costs exceed amounts typically appropriated. Hold on. It's at the top of the definition. Means capital construction, infrastructure upgrades and replacement projects to systems external to a building or facility that are necessary for the continued functionality of a building or facility. I think it is external to the facility, so I think it would potentially include like an additional security vestibule or a classroom.
Yeah,
we could
and-
certainly evaluate that. Over
Yeah.
lunch hour.
And Mr. Chairman, on that, it doesn't sound like, if that's where we're using components at this point in time, it doesn't sound like it even captures components appropriately if that's external.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is like a sewer line that goes beyond the building.
Yeah.
To the main tap or something to that effect. I think in Director McComey has a lot more experience.
Yeah,
on-
Director, any thoughts are welcome.
Mr. Chairman, so when House Bill 86 was put together, it pulled in UW, pulled in community colleges, pulled in the state side and the school side. And they were trying to provide a common language for that. And so the first year they tried the bill, it died. And one of the major reasons was the community colleges in particular were concerned about, well, how do we work on the outside of the building? On the school side, it's not an issue. We work on the outside of the building if we need to. But they had some internal language within the community college commission that kind of segregated how you did that. So that language was really brought in to alleviate the concerns of the community colleges. And it may have been UW also, but I distinctly remember having the conversation with community colleges on a mechanism to work on the exterior of the building. What does that look like? So that's where that kind of came into that overall bill.
So Director, is it your feeling that based on that statute that was just read, does that give you any flexibility or leeway to lean into the problem at hand?
I think we could take a look at that with our legal counsel. I think it perhaps does do that. For example, if you wanted to add on for a vestibule on the outside, that's exterior of the building. Those are generally extensions onto the building, at least the component part of it. You might be able to segregate within the building, put another wall in so when your visitors come in, they have to push the button and hit that and go through. But generally adding in that place that you move them to on the outside, the administrative part is generally being put on the outside of the building. So it would allow that to be addressed in that regard.
Well,
So-
Director, it sure seemed, I appreciated Mr. Rex's comments that, it feels like to me that you would have the purview at any point in time as the Director of State Construction to take projects like a modification of a kitchen that needs to be a commercial setup. That feels like something you could go to your commission, and if the commission agreed, that's a project that we could add on one of the lists. And I guess what we're trying to get there to give you the ability to do that. Do you see where that window is?
Mr. Chairman, so listening to the discussion on the minor cap versus major cap or major construction or just construction, I guess, when they took away the minor, I didn't see where there's anything excluding putting minor into a major, right? Request. It's just a district would have to come to the commission, make their justification. Commission would have to approve and say, add that to your budget request. And then it would come to this committee and to the governor's office. So I think there is a mechanism to do that. I don't know anything that says any threshold that says, well, if it's less than $1 million or it's less than $5 million, I think probably from a practicality standpoint, how would the legislature like to see if all of a sudden we add 30 more requests and some of them being literally $10,000. Would you all like to see that? And that would be something to work out with this committee and maybe the joint appropriations. Maybe it's just a funding mechanism, kind of like what we do with components. The top we're listing 38 or $30 million, and there's HVAC and this and that, and have a dollar next to it. I mean, it wouldn't be a huge lift like when we come in and really spend a lot of time testifying on a new Rock Springs or Campbell High School. It'd be smaller that way, but I think you probably could put together a list, whatever we want to call it, renewal or minor cap, whatever would please the legislature.
You know, I could envision a line item, Director, that under which there are 5 or 6 or 8 projects that have been vetted by the districts that bring them up and the commission, and at least try to figure out how to get to a place where a district doesn't feel like they're just running into a brick wall, or you're having to look at them and say, boy, if it weren't for these statutes, I'd be able to help you, but I can't help you. That just seems like an impasse that we ought to be able to get past.
Yeah,
right?
Mr.
Get beyond
Chairman, you asked Mr. Ruxus about, I'm sure you'd like to help out. There's been many a time I'm looking at it, shaking my head. It makes perfect sense. We should do that, but I'm not the guy that can help you.
Yeah.
And just based on the authority that we have. So I
Well,
think it is maybe
appreciate,
something
Director,
that
you've kind of led
we
us.
could do that. So
You've led the charge on this notion that there are buildings that have a lot of life left in them. And we've kind of gone into a renovation mode. And we've done some amazing things. My district in particular, 3 or 4 buildings that have been completely metamorphosized. So even on a small level, think what that would do. The kitchen example is a great one. Appreciate Ms. Lewis saying, you know, if we could just modify a little bit, but we can't get there. So
yeah, Mr. Chairman, you'll see this in our next item that comes up after lunch, and we're talking about the annual report, and as part of that's the budget. We're required within that annual report to give you a priorities of every item in that budget, be it construction, be it design, be it major maintenance. There's a priority listing, and then within that, we kind of list out, number 1, 2, 3, as we come down through those projects. If you look at components, the number 1 component project we feel is the highest priority within that. It's the highest priority within the priority of where component projects rank in the overall budget. And this would be another one that if you added that category, we would be required to bring that in as a priority, and that would change from year to year, and then those projects within that priority would be prioritized to move forward for discussion with the legislature.
thank you, Director. So committee, I'm inclined to take all of this under advisement, maybe go to lunch, come back, and after lunch, if anybody has an idea of what they think might help us get there on this topic, or there is the option of doing nothing, if we feel like we're fine where we're at. So
It's gotten us this far.
yeah, we've made her this far. Yeah. Even though we're dragging one leg, we're still making progress. Senator Love, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was trying to remember back, this has been a dozen years ago, 2014, I believe. I tried to look it up a second ago. I think that date's right. Because of school safety and security concerns at the time, I believe Title IX was used at that time to allow for funding of vestibules on buildings, and not just external vestibules. In our district, we went in, we already had the trap inside between the 2 door sets. So we renovated inside the building. We put in new doorways, security microphones, bulletproof glass, put new doors in, did all of the things necessary to secure that vestibule as it existed without going external of the building. Do we know what mechanism we did that with?
Mr. Chairman, in 14, I don't. The study was done in 15. Well, there was money put aside from the legislature, I believe, in 14 for safety and security. That funding mechanism, which again, you'll see later today. And then we were asked to go out and do that study in 15 before we spent those funds. But I'm not, that's not to say maybe there wasn't some funds spent at that point in time. I came on as director and I don't know if it was late 15 or 16, late 15, I guess. So I was there right when the study was done. We had the study, we had the money, and we're kind of moving forward with it. So.
Go ahead, follow up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you through you, Director. So using a very similar mechanism, we should be able to easily lift what we're talking about. Would you think?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. That's where if we wanted to set up a different category, whatever we'd like to call it, and then again, just bring it as a budget request, things that work through the commission, we could prioritize them. I mean, you'll see in today's on component projects, we've got about a dozen component projects, and then we have our 3 after that are in that list that we've prioritized. And if there's any additional funding that falls forward. So, there's nothing says that one year it might be 3 projects and the next year it might be 10, depending on what comes forward from the districts.
So good questions, Senator Love. Thank you. And Senator Rothfuss, I'm kind of glancing at you, knowing that maybe by the time we get past a lunch break, you might have an idea for us. That's what I'm thinking. But I've just been around you for a long time. That's all.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, while all of us are eating, nobody got a homework assignment. Is that what I heard?
Well, I didn't say it that way, but yeah, it's kind of that way. I would ask everybody to give some thought to that, and we'll come back to it after the break, which would give us time to make any motions. We've closed public comment. We're good. We've had a good discussion on it. We kind of know where we're at. To me, it feels like we would like to do something, Director, to give you whatever little bit of flexibility you feel like you need. I'm not crazy about creating more line items in what we do in school facilities, but that one, which might allow a school to modify and move on with the world, just seems like it maybe might be a good thing. So any final comments? Yeah.
Just looking forward to discussion after lunch.
Yeah. Okay. Tanya, anything? Matt, are you good? Back to Tanya.
Yeah, no, Mr. Chairman, I'll catch Senator Rothfuss at lunch.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's good of you. We appreciate it. Committee, let's take a break until come back at maybe 1:30. And we'll be ready to go. We're a little ahead on the agenda, so we're good. Almost. I know. I got break too. Hey,